All right, good evening, everybody. I'm going to call to order the Planning Commission meeting for the town of Truckee on May 16th, 2023. Can I have a roll call, please?
Chair Gove.
Present.
Commissioner Freeman.
Here.
Commissioner Claren.
Here.
Commissioner Taylor.
Here.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Here.
All right, and now please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
All right, let's go ahead and move into public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to come up to the podium and make a public comment about anything that is not on the agenda tonight. So if you have any public comment, please make your way to the podium, state your name, and ramble on for 3 minutes about whatever you like. Seeing none, we'll close public comment and move into agenda item number 5, the approval of minutes. We have the March 21, 2023 minutes, part 1. Does anybody have any edits? So it would just be Commissioners Claren and Freeman. Either one of you guys have any edits for the minutes?
No. No edits.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, so just for clarification to our new commissioners, you will be abstaining from this as you were not at the meeting. Okay, roll call, please.
Chair Gove.
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman.
Yes.
Commissioner Claren.
Yes.
Do we need to note the abstentions or no? No. Okay, motion passes. Moving on to part 2. So again, part 2 of the March 2022, that was the second night. Any edits to that, gentlemen?
No. No.
All motion to approve?
Second.
Chair Gove.
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman.
Yes.
Commissioner Claren.
Yes.
Motion passes. Moving on to public hearings, minor review. Agenda item 6.1 is for application number 2023-20, Crestwood Construction Industrial Building Time Extension. And Chantel has a staff presentation. Chantel?
Good evening, Commissioners. So as Chair Gove said, tonight we're here with Crestwood Construction Industrial Building Time Extension. This is a minor item, and item 6.1. To start off, I just wanted to chat a little bit about the Planning Commission's role tonight. Most importantly, what the role isn't. And the role for a time extension is not to re-review the already approved project, but to look at the project and see if it still remains consistent with our current development code and general plan or other plans that could be specific to the project. For this project, it's development code and general plan. And if there were changes to the development code or the general plan, did staff or did the applicant make the correct changes to make the project consistent? Wrong button. So for our major discussion topics is, as I mentioned, is the project consistent with our plans, and can the required time extension findings be made to approve the time extension? So a little bit about the project. This project is located, I'm going to say industrial a lot tonight, on Truckee Industrial Park on Industrial Way. It's a 1-acre project site. Our general plan land use designation is industrial, and its zoning is M for manufacturing. As you can see, it's currently being used as an outdoor contractor's yard for Crestwood Construction. And the applicant has proposed to construct an 8,800 square foot industrial shell building. The building is modular inside. It can be, partition walls can be removed, so it can have 8 units, each 1,100 square feet with a small office and restroom. Crestwood Construction will be using a portion of the building and leasing the remainder. And as I mentioned, it can be configured to whatever needs the tenant may need. So it could be larger or smaller. And you can see the floor plan. So the project was approved by the Planning Commission in February of 2021. The land use entitlements required for the project is a development permit, and those are for permitted uses and projects that are 7,500 square foot or more floor area and over 26,000 square feet of site disturbance. And there was also a sign plan that was approved for the signs for the tenants in the building. So with the project being approved on February 16th, there is a 10-day appeal period, and the project actually, the permit becomes effective the day after. So that's actually March 1st. Traditionally, our land use entitlements are valid for 2 years, so that would have put an expiration date for March 1st, 2023, unless a time extension request is submitted and approved. The applicant has submitted their building permit submittal in February of this year and also the time extension. They are requesting a 2-year time extension, which is the maximum. They do plan on completing the required work this building season. I think that kind of depends on how quick we get that building permit out back to them and any changes they need to make, but that's the plan. But however, they'll have another building season, if approved tonight, to complete. And because the Planning Commission was the review authority for the original project, you are also the review authority for the time extension request. So we'll delve into those findings a little bit. First finding is that the permittee has made a good faith effort to exercise the permit and has exercised due diligence. And then also, as I've mentioned multiple times now, that it's consistent with the current development code or general plan. And that is the development code or general plan in effect at time that the application has been deemed complete. So staff believes that time extension finding number 1 can be made. The applicant in the justification letter has discussed that there were COVID-19 related delays. This project came in 2020, but since the approval, the applicant has gone through all the architectural plans, engineering plans, structural, has gotten a lot of has received the approvals from other districts, and has submitted the building permit. So they are ready to go. This is not a situation where they're just asking for an extension to just delay more time, but they're actually, wanting to exercise that permit and develop their project. And the second finding is the compliance with our general plan and development code. So since the project was approved, it was under the 2025 general plan, which is still in effect at this date, soon not to be, but and no changes have been made to the general plan policies that would affect this project. No changes to the project have been made that would bring it out of compliance with our general plan. We also contacted special districts, utility companies, et cetera. No objections were filed and no new concerns were raised. And so staff does believe that the project is still consistent with the general plan. And as far as the development code, there was a change in May of 2021 for our bicycle parking and support facilities. We used to just say that 3 bicycle parking spaces would be needed for a project such as this. We have a different way of determining that. We have a different calculation, but it happens to be that the calculation comes out to 3 bicycle parking spaces, so it is consistent. Upon review, our engineering division did ask for a condition of approval to be changed to prior to building permit issuance from prior to certificate of occupancy. They would like to see the BMP operation plan ahead of time, and this is what their current standard is at the moment. So staff is proposing that change to condition of approval 19. The project was noticed. Neighbors within 500 feet received postcards. It was noticed in the Sierra Sun, and we have received no public comment. So getting right to the staff recommendation, staff is recommending that the commission adopt resolution 2023-07, approving the following actions based on the recommended findings and subject to the recommended conditions of approval. First, approve a 2-year time extension for the previously approved project, and then determine the project to be exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to 15061B3 of the CEQA guidelines, and that exemption is where there's certainty there's no possibility that the activity in question could have a significant effect on the environment, and the activity in question is the time extension, not the project. So that's why that exemption was used. And as always, the Planning Commission has some alternative actions they could take. They could continue, or you could continue the public hearing to date and time certain. You could request additional information. We may have to reopen the meeting for public comment. You could find that the exemption to CEQA wasn't suitable and ask for additional review under CEQA. You could approve the time extension. You could add, modify, or eliminate any provisions or conditions of approval, or you could deny the time extension on the basis that the required findings were not made. If you do approve the time extension, the appeal period will end May 26th at 5 p.m. And that is my brief and hopefully concise presentation this evening.
Thank you very much, Chantal. And is there a representative from the applicant that would like to present today? Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
They're here for questions, though, if you have any.
Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to move into clarifying questions for staff. Commissioners, Commissioner Freeman, do you have any clarifying questions for staff?
It was just, I don't know if it's a staff question or an applicant question, but is the permit ready to get pulled?
So because the land use entitlement expired while the permit was in our system, we've held it. Just to be fair for those that are in our system and in the queue. So it's, there's probably some changes that may be requested by building or engineering or planning. But we do not want to really review or process that until we have an approved land use entitlement.
Got it. So there's maybe some paperwork to do to get stuff up to
I've taken a brief look and it looks pretty much like what we've approved. So, there might be a little bit of housekeeping.
Okay, I think that's it.
Commissioner Claren, clarifying questions for staff.
No, I had the same question, actually.
Okay. Commissioner Taylor, do you have any clarifying questions for staff?
I do not.
Commissioner Kavanaugh, clarifying questions for staff.
None from me.
Okay, and I have none either. So with that, does anybody have any questions for the applicant? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move into public.
Can I ask a question then?
Yeah, that's the whole point.
Marshall, when are you guys planning on starting? Or Gavin, if you want to answer it.
Go ahead and come on up to the podium so we can get you on the microphone.
I
and on
barely
record.
recognize Gavin with that whole goatee thing going on.
Gavin Ball, bearded Gavin Ball, land use consultant, representing Marshall. Yeah, he plans on starting this summer, but there's a lot of things that are contingent upon that start or commencement of construction, including finalization of metallic plans, the actual building permit, getting through the planning commissions. But all intentions are that. If not, it'll be next summer. Has to be.
Would have to be next summer. So you're trying to get started this year, but depending on if you get your paperwork through.
Yeah, but it's mid-May, and you know how it is, ordering the structure, and there's a lot of things that have to come to fruition. Ideally, it seems reasonable that it's not going to be initiation and completion of the grading, the foundation, and the structure, but and if it goes to construction this year, it'll be grading and the foundation, winterized, go vertical next year. Otherwise, it's going to be all of that next year with completion before the deadline.
That's assuming we don't get another 70-year winter.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of assumptions, presumptions in all of this, and has been for 2 years. It's a difficult process, as most of you know.
Yeah. So the intent is to get it started relatively as soon as possible, but you still need to order the shop and the materials and things. Waiting on this first. Financing's okay?
Mitch, I hate to interrupt, but staff, you got a hot mic? We can hear you whispering.
Yeah, everything's all lined up. Ready to go.
Financing's ready to go?
Yeah.
Cool. That was it for me.
Okay, with that, let's go ahead and move into public comment. So we're going to open public comment on this specific agenda item. If you have anything you'd like to say about this project, good, bad, or indifferent, come on up to the podium, state your name. You'll have 3 minutes to make your point. Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Okay, so commission deliberation. I'll start with you, Commissioner Freeman. How are you feeling about this time extension?
Seems plausible to me. I don't see any reason why not to give it.
Fair enough. Commissioner Kavanaugh.
It seems reasonable.
Commissioner Claren.
I agree. It's reasonable.
Commissioner Taylor.
I would also agree.
I'd like to make a motion to approve, pull the language up, Resolution 2023-07, approving the following actions based on the recommended findings and the subject to recommended conditions of approval. Number one, approve a 2-year time extension for the previously approved Crestwood Construction Industrial Building Project. And number two, to determine the project to be exempt from the California Environmental Act, CEQA, pursuant to Section 15061B3 of the CEQA guidelines. Do I hear a second?
I'll second
Give it to
that.
Dan.
Dan?
Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Chair Gove.
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman.
Yes.
Commissioner Claren.
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor.
Yes.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Motion passes. Good luck with your project, gentlemen. Okay, moving into item number 7, public hearings major review. So on the agenda tonight, we have item 7.1, which is for application number 2022-14, the Soaring Ranch Phase 2 time extension and project amendment. And the staff presentation will be Laura. Laura, what do you have for us?
Okay, good evening, everyone. Here to present to you the time extension and project amendment for the Soaring Ranch Phase 2 project. The applicant has requested a 2-year time extension and some amendments to the previous project approvals. This was a mixed-use commercial and residential project on Soaring Way, and it was approved by the commission in February of 2021. That's an overview showing the location of the project site. And I wanted to give some project background just because we do have some commissioners who weren't involved in this review originally. So we'll go through this pretty quickly. The Jorg Ranch specific plan was adopted in March 2015 and amended in June 2021. The concepts of that plan are really around economic diversification, business clustering, protecting open space. And within that, you can see the CR zone in the sort of pink color there. That's the regional commercial zone, which is where this project is located. Since the specific plan was adopted, there have been 5 projects approved within the plan area. The first was Soaring Ranch, which was an overall development for that regional commercial zone. And it had 3 phases of development. The first was the Rayleigh's project with the co-anchor and the freestanding commercial building. Those have been constructed. Then Truckee Tahoe Lumber was constructed. Next was the Soaring Ranch Phase 2 project, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. And then subsequently, I wanted to include these just for a little bit of reference. The Soaring Ranch Phase 3 project was approved in October of 2020. You can see from this rendering that the applicant team put together the Phase 2 project here in the front, and then the Phase 3 project behind it, and Rayleigh's, you can see both of those in the background. And then the following month, the Jorg Ranch Parcel 2 project was approved across the street. That's an industrial and residential mixed-use project. So like I said, this was a project that was approved. It's a mixed-use project. It had 31,500 square feet of commercial floor area when it was approved, 69 multifamily residential units. That included 61 market rate and 8 affordable housing units. And there are some differences in the building square footage calculations that I just wanted to point out in case that created any confusion when you were reading through it in the staff report. When the building permit was processed, there were some modifications that brought the commercial floor area up to 35,766 square feet. So it's about 32% of the overall, and the residential is 68%. There were a few entitlements that were involved with that application. We had to amend the development permit that was previously approved, the plan development, the tentative map, and approve a new use permit for multifamily residential in that zone district. And as part of that, the applicant also requested a 26% density bonus that increased the number of residential units from 55 to 69 with the 8 affordable units. And through that density bonus, parking concessions were also approved. Here's the site plan showing the approved project. Some building elevations from the previous review, and some renderings that the applicant team put together back then. Since the approval, we've had a couple of updates. One was the specific plan amendment process. Like I said, that was in June 2021. The council adopted some changes to the plan, primarily around the housing requirements. Those went into effect in June 2021. And then also the parcel map for Soaring Ranch was recorded. So that created 3 parcels within that area for those different phases of development. So the one that's highlighted in yellow there is the Phase 2 project. And that brings us to the approval that's requested tonight. And that's a time extension to extend the land use entitlements. Those were set to expire on March 1, 2023. And the applicant submitted their time extension application on December 28th, 2022, which complied with the development code requirements. And now approval by the commission would be required to extend the entitlements that were set to expire. We don't need to extend the tentative map because the parcel map has been recorded. And then in addition to that, there's a project amendment that's requested. The applicant requested some changes to the previously approved density bonus. And as we were reviewing the project, we identified some other areas where we thought modifications were needed to make sure that the project remains consistent with the adopted plans that are in place. So the commission's role tonight is to review the time extension and the project amendment. Since the Planning Commission was the review authority for the original project, you'd be the authorized body to make any changes to the project. The time extension that's requested is for 2 years. And as Chantal kind of walked you through earlier, I won't repeat all the different requirements in the development code for a time extension. But those do include that diligent pursuit has been shown and that the permits haven't been exercised. So in this case, a building permit application was submitted in March of 2022. The town review was completed in December 2022, and there's some remaining outstanding items that are related to outside agency requirements, and then just payment of some fees. And then that project, or that building permit, would be ready to be issued. So since the permit hasn't been issued and foundations for the structures haven't been installed, then we would say that the entitlements haven't been exercised, and the extension would be necessary. And in granting the time extension request, one of the findings is that we have to make sure that the project's still in compliance with all of the adopted regulations, which include the development code, general plan, and the Jorga Ranch specific plan. So as was discussed in the staff report, the applicant team had requested that we process their application under the original specific plan. They cited some different government codes and a development code section to support why they thought that should be processed under the original requirements. We reviewed the information that they provided. We consulted with the town attorney. He also did some research into housing law and wasn't able to find anything that would say that a project remains vested under the original standards for post-entitlement changes, which is what's being requested. So we think it's appropriate to make sure that the project's consistent with the current specific plan. And that's the big difference, is that with the amended specific plan, there are a few things that have changed that would affect this project. In terms of the density bonus concessions, the applicant, like I said, was asking for the density bonus concession to waive the second floor balcony requirements in phase 2. And under their original project approval, because they were providing at least 10% of the units as affordable, they qualified for one density bonus concession, which they ended up not actually using because the parking reductions they were asking for were allowed separate from those concessions through the density bonus law. And if the Planning Commission determines that the request to process the time extension under the original specific plan is not granted, then the applicant came up with a plan to address that and show that they're in compliance with the June 2021 specific plan with some modifications through a second density bonus concession. In order to qualify for the second concession, they would need to increase the affordability of the project to at least 17%. So they're proposing to do that. And with the 17% affordability, they would be restricting a total of 10 dwelling units instead of 8 to lower income households. And if those two concessions are granted, then they would use the one to waive the second floor balcony requirements, and then the second would be to waive the mixed use development standard in the current specific plan, which says that a project has to have no more than 50% of the floor area for residential uses in a mixed-use project. So when the original project was approved, we didn't have that requirement, and it was approved with 1/3 commercial, 2/3 residential. So obviously, in order to comply with the new 50% requirement, they would have to do a significant redesign of the project. In terms of Jorga Ranch specific plan consistency, some of the things that changed were all projects are now required to comply with the development code requirements for workforce housing. And so in this case, that would require 10 workforce housing units. So if the applicant is determined to be subject to the new requirements, they're proposing to deed restrict 10 units within the phase 2 project. And those would have to comply with our workforce housing requirements, which also has some other restrictions for prohibiting short-term rentals, requiring a certain lease length and things like that. The second thing that changed in terms of the housing requirements was projects are now subject to inclusionary housing, which was not required under the original specific plan. So that means that 15% of all new market rate units have to be deed restricted for affordability. So with the 55 units, if you subtract the 10 that they're proposing to deed restrict for workforce housing, that would leave 45 that would be subject to the inclusionary requirements. And if you take 15% of that, you come up with 6.75 units. Under the specific plan, an alternate equivalent proposal can be requested for the inclusionary housing. So the applicant is requesting approval of that in this case. Instead of doing 6.75 units restricted to low income. They're proposing to deed restrict 14 units for rent to local workers within the school district boundary. So if the commission is comfortable with granting that request, we've included some draft language in the commission resolution to document the local's restriction on the 14 units. Some other things that changed, the RMW parcel construction. There was some recalculation of what would trigger that based on 40% of the specific plan build out. So those updated numbers were included in the draft resolution. And then there's some different development standards. One of them is the 50% requirement for mixed use, which we already talked about. Then there's some multifamily residential project requirements, one of which is the private exterior space. Again, that's proposed to be waived through the density bonus concession. All the other new requirements are being met with the project. And then there were some additional ones related to solar exposure, electric vehicle charging, and bike parking. The original project was consistent with all of those, so no changes are necessary. And then in terms of development code consistency, the time extension findings that Chantal walked through earlier would also apply to this case. We believe that the findings can be made to allow the 2-year time extension. And then in terms of the density bonus findings, to deny a density bonus, the burden is really on the jurisdiction to find that one of these findings that are listed on the screen are applicable to the project. We believe that the applicant has met the requirement to provide the substantial evidence to show that we should approve the density bonus. And since we don't believe any of those 6 findings can be made, we think that the commission should grant the density bonus concessions that are requested. In terms of development code, development standard consistency, the code's been amended a few times since this project was approved, but in going through all the new standards, nothing would trigger any changes that need to be made to the project. And then the 2025 general plan is currently still in effect, so the project is still consistent with the general plan. Agency comments that were received on the time extension were incorporated into the resolution. We didn't get any objections to allowing the additional 2 years to complete the project. And so the project would be required to be in compliance with all of the special agency requirements. And in terms of environmental review, we're recommending that you find the project exempt under some different CEQA guidelines sections. Basically, when the specific plan was adopted, there was an EIR that was also adopted, and then an EIR addendum with the June 2021 updates. And those looked at all the different environmental impacts that were associated with the build-out of the plan. There's a lot of mitigation measures that are put in place. And when this Soaring Ranch Phase 2 project went to Planning Commission previously, we did hire an outside consultant to do an analysis and figure out if there were any impacts that hadn't already been addressed, and they found that there were not. So we believe the project is still consistent with the specific plan, and we don't require any additional environmental review. I did want to note a couple of edits that were brought up by the applicant team. There was a misnumbering in the resolution on page 4. And then one of the dates on page 4 as well should have been May, not March 2025. And I won't read all of this. This is just the recommendation from the staff report, which hopefully you had a chance to look at. Basically, we think that the findings to approve the time extension in the project amendment can be made. So our recommendation is to adopt Resolution 2023-08, approving the time extension and project amendment, subject to all of the recommended conditions of approval. You could choose to take an alternate action this evening. You could continue the hearing. You could change any of the land use permits. You could deny the project if you find that the findings can't be made, or you could require additional environmental review. And if the commission takes action tonight, the appeal period would end May 26th at 5 p.m. And I'm happy to take any questions. We also have Rick McCon here on behalf of the applicant team in case you have any questions for him.
Sorry. Thank you very much. So no presentation from the applicant, but available to answer questions.
Correct.
Okay, great. Okay. Okay, so we'll move into clarifying questions for staff. Commissioner Freeman, you have any clarifying questions for staff?
What is the status of their application as far as building permits goes and kind of their paperwork so they could start this project?
So all of the town departments signed off in December, and it's just a question of meeting the outside agency requirements at this point and then paying the fees, and it'll be ready to pull.
Unless they make changes to the commercial floor area.
So they're not proposing to make any changes as part of this. This is just allowing what was previously approved to sort of be reapproved under the new specific plan.
Is it typical to see amendments to a project lumped in with a time extension?
No, I would say this is not something we typically see, but because the specific plan did change in ways that the project couldn't meet, we had to get a little creative with trying to figure out, working with the applicant team to see how we could find a path for them to be able to move forward with their project.
And is that kind of what happened here? Is the specific plan changed?
Yeah.
Okay. That's it.
Commissioner Claren?
So I had some questions that got answered as I was reading through the project documents. I'm a little concerned about parking. I'm already parking in that dirt area when I go to Mountain Hardware over there. So we're going to be putting in another building with even more parking demand, and they were allowed to, I guess, lower some of that for some concessions.
Yeah, under the state density bonus law, we're actually required to allow reductions
And I
in the
get
parking.
that. I just wanted to say it out loud that it kind of stinks, I think.
Cockamamie scheme out of Sacramento, you say?
Excuse me?
A cockamamie scheme out of Sacramento, you say?
You said that. I didn't say that. Okay. It spoke something about a sign regulation modification. What is that? I was just curious. It said something in the documents that was sent along with the agenda.
Sign regulation notification?
Yeah, I don't remember what page it was on.
You think that was in the staff report?
It was in the staff report.
I am not sure. I don't remember anything about the sign. They didn't have any signage approved as part of this project. They're going to be coming in for separate sign. They wanted to do a separate sign plan.
Maybe that was the modification. Also, in this presentation, Laura, you brought up there were 6.75 units, and then they're doing 14 units instead of the 6.75. So, and then there are 10 units that they needed to do for low income or workforce housing. I'm confused here. So, are the 10 units part of the 14 units? So instead of doing 16.75, they're doing 14 total?
So there's separate requirements. The 10 is for the workforce housing. Those have to be deed restricted to the low income.
Okay.
The 6.75 is the inclusionary requirement. And what they're proposing is instead of doing the low income deed restriction, to deed restrict it to workers within the school district boundary, which is an alternate equivalent that we've seen approved previously with other projects.
So that includes the 10 plus the 6.75 that they were going to do, so for a total of only 14 instead of...
So you would have the 10 workforce and then the 14 deed restricted to
So it'd be
workers.
24
So it'd be
total.
24 instead of 8 low income that were originally approved.
Okay. That's it for right now. Thank you.
Commissioner Kavanaugh, clarifying questions for staff.
So this potential waiver of private exterior space requirements, knowing that there's going to be a phase 3, if this concession is granted, is there a downside? I guess I'm asking my fellow commissioners too. Is there a downside to granting this now with the potential for that not being incorporated in another phase or another part of this plan, this specific plan area, or elsewhere in town? And is that a bad direction to go? I mean, I want to be able to get the density bonus in there and the affordable housing in there, but is that a concern, I guess, is an open question I'm asking.
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, the Phase 3 project was approved with the balcony waiver as part of their density bonus. So there is precedent for that within the Soaring Ranch project.
But globally speaking, density bonus is provided by state law, and developers can essentially ask for virtually any modification to a town standard at this point. So it's possible we'll see more modification on future housing projects. But it also comes with either required affordability per our requirements or additional affordability.
Thank you. I see the nexus there, something we're trying to achieve. Thanks.
Any other questions?
But there's no actual change to the number of affordable units being proposed, right?
There will be more with this proposal. There will be 10 deed restricted for affordability, and then if you approve the alternate equivalent, an additional 14 that are restricted to the local workers.
Commissioner Taylor, do you have any clarifying questions for staff?
I just have one other question. Were any other concessions considered besides the removal of the private outdoor space in the previous review of the project?
So they had asked for some trail infrastructure concessions, which was not determined to be something that the commission could grant. So that was not granted. And then they had asked for the parking reductions as a concession. And then in working with them and looking at the legislation, we determined that those are actually separate from the concessions, so they had to be granted. So they essentially didn't use their one concession that they were allowed.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Kavanaugh, look like you're thumbing through your notes for more questions.
Just another one related to that. You said that the alternate equivalent proposal had been approved elsewhere. Just for my edification, where else in town has that one been used as part of a density bonus?
So it was approved for Coburn Crossing. I'm not sure if that was a density bonus or if it was just an alternate equivalent.
Yeah, our code allows alternate equivalent proposals irrespective of a density bonus. And we've used them, I would say, a handful of times in the last 10 plus years.
If I'm remembering, I think this was our first density bonus project, right? In Soaring in general. I don't think we've done other ones outside of Soaring that have been approved yet. But so it's still pretty new for developers to request.
Any other questions, Commissioner Kavanaugh? All righty. Does anybody have, well, actually, no, I've got questions. I just want to make sure I understand the timeline, correct? So we approved this February 2021, right?
Right.
Yeah, and then they brought in their construction document set for building permit approval. The initial application was March of 2022, and then subsequent back and forth got to final approvals December 2022. Okay,
Right.
got it. Okay, that's all the questions I have for staff. Does anybody have clarifying questions for the applicant besides me?
I'm going to probably have the same questions I have for Crestwood.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and start, Mitch?
Rick, do you want
If you want to come up to the podium and turn on the mic.
Aye. No.
The red light on?
There we go.
There it is. So, like the same questions, what's the time frame? What's your scheduled time frame?
I think currently, given the current environment, we will start in 2024.
How long do you think this project will take to build?
18 months to 2 years.
So if your extension is good till the 2025, you're going to need another one? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, because if we get my understanding is we have 4 years to complete the project. We have 2 years to get all the foundations in. That secures our
That's right.
entitlements.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what's your plan for phase 3? What stage is that at?
We were working to get through phase 2 and get it started. We have our approvals, so we're going to start working on construction documents for phase 3. Hopefully kind of align them so we can start construction of phase 3 as we're wrapping up, part of phase 2.
So has any of that been submitted, or is that going to be under the new general plan?
I'm assuming that because when we had our entitlements, that we're under the old general plan.
Is that
Correct.
That's right.
Okay. So is the point for the two phases to blend together once it's a completed project?
Yes.
And from what I'm looking at plans-wise, there's nothing going behind Rayleigh's against 267 there. That's all open
correct.
space. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's it for now.
So you said, given the current conditions, are we talking access to capital?
Capital is
markets?
part of it.
Yeah.
Our public financing is another part of it for our offsite infrastructure and just to work for the current construction cost environment.
So with the current, capital debt markets, is this project still profitable the way it looks right now, or are you hoping for these?
We're trying to make it that way.
Right. And that's why you're probably going to pause until next year. Hopefully some of
Yes.
these interest rates come down. Okay.
Or construction cost or something.
Got it. Commissioner Taylor, any questions for the applicant?
One question. So when do the entitlements expire for phase 3? Does that align with when you're expecting construction to be done with phase 2?
Phase 3 would be October of 2024.
Correct.
So you would have to begin work on phase 3 before phase 2 is completed.
Yes.
So would you be finishing up your earthwork on phase 2 and then roll right into phase 3, or try and get those foundos in?
We would like to do a lot of the earthwork at the same time because there's some export and import issues that would help us out if we're doing them both at the same time. So, yeah, we got a tough, timing issue to figure out. So that's part of what we're, trying to work on right now.
Okie doke. Any other clarifying questions for the applicant from the dais? Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
All right, so at this point, we'll go ahead and open public comment for item 7.1. If you have something to like to say about this project, please step up to the podium, state your name. You'll have 3 minutes. Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move into commission deliberation. Commissioner Freeman, how are you feeling about this time extension?
I don't have a problem with the time extension. I don't love that we're now amending the project. That to me feels disingenuous from what we approved, whatever it was, 2 years ago. I don't love that now they're talking about a reduction in commercial floor area from what would be required now, correct? From 50 to 30%, is that right?
No, it's the same.
Or sorry, the new standard is 50%. If we
Right.
deny the time extension, then that would be required.
If they were to resubmit under the current plan, then yeah, it would be a different mix.
So now they're amending the project, but not bringing the rest of the project up to the current standards. So I guess that's kind of my rub.
Commissioner Claren?
Dan, why is that a rub for you?
Well, I think originally, under the specific plan, this was supposed to be a commercially heavy project to provide a commercial center for our community, and that's why the specific plan was changed. So now, we approved this project under the old plan. We made changes to the specific plan. We also talked about the commercial floor area being in excess, and even if these projects could be allowed at all, which we kind of did some math back then and agreed that it was fine. And now we're amending the project, but not increasing the commercial floor area, which would be the new requirement. And I just still think that, yes, we have a need for housing. You're going to have how many units here between phase 2 and phase 3? Quite a few.
Yeah.
And what do you have there now? You have the brewery.
Very expensive supermarket.
Nice supermarket. There's the blind, the shade store. I think a massage place. And I think there's going to be another restaurant in there that's been trying to eat in there for a while. The Fa.
That's what I've heard.
They've been working for quite some time. Seems like a lot of people living in that area that need services, not to mention everyone else.
So is existing really, is that the commercial space you're talking about? Is none added on to this residential?
There is commercial space in phase
In
2
here
and
there
phase 3.
is, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we're at 30% floor area is the current residential.
Right.
But that was based on the old specific plan.
Right.
Then we changed the specific plan. Phase 3 was submitted right before that change went in, right? Which we couldn't really deny.
Right.
So that's kind of my
I get
concern.
it. I get it. Thanks.
Commissioner Taylor?
I would just ask also, do you have a sense of kind of the community serving businesses that you think or feel that the community needs in this area or that's missing that could maybe be, I don't know, emphasized, promoted some way, just some way to kind of make sure those uses go in there rather than, say, another massage parlor or something that may not be as helpful to this surrounding area? Do you have a sense of what those might be?
Sure, we could brainstorm kind of with businesses that we think are needed. We live in a capitalist economy, though, so those businesses that we need are the ones that survive.
Right.
And kind of like the Grizzly Menswear that didn't make it there but moved downtown, that wasn't the right business at the right time in the right place. We'll see if the other restaurant is successful there. It looks like Truckee Brewing is doing a decent business there. Certainly there's demand for that.
I mean, I just also think with more people living in that specific place, there will be more people to utilize those businesses. So maybe it's not the worst mix that they're not bringing it up to that 50%, half and half commercial and residential. Also, I do understand that redesigning that entire project to meet that new threshold would be expensive and also delay the project even more. And I think we all want to see something go in there rather than it sit vacant still. So I think I would be okay with keeping that 1/3, 2/3 breakdown.
Yeah, and I think we are getting at the housing. We are getting a few more units as locals only, which is nice.
So I just want to make sure I understand your rub, if you will. You're feeling like we're not getting enough commercial.
Precisely.
Right. Do you remember
Which was the exact issue that we had when we reviewed this 2 years ago
Right.
and approved it the first time.
Right.
And it was, are we over the threshold of the allowable commercial floor area?
Right. Do keep in mind, though, that we did approve the project across the street that Laura brought up at the beginning of her presentation, and that had commercial frontage on the west side, did it not?
It does.
A little bit.
Yeah.
It's industrial.
It's
yeah,
industrial,
it's mostly
right.
industrial.
And those are kind of like warehouses. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's going to be like a retail or like
Right,
walk-up
yeah.
commercial kind of uses.
Fair enough.
Right. It's not a lot of commercial. It's
Yeah.
geared towards, I think, contractors and. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure what type of uses they are planning to put in there when they actually build it.
But just, light industrial, paint shops, and, whatever else.
Airplane parts.
Yeah.
How many businesses? It was on.
Oh, sorry.
About how many businesses are anticipated? I mean, how many can you put in 36,000 square feet?
I think we have a
Yeah,
max floor area of 5,000 square feet, right?
Yep.
And so I think some of those smaller spaces there are probably 1,100, 1,200 square feet.
And wasn't there something that said you
5 to
couldn't
20?
put businesses in there that were designed just to serve the residents of the mixed use? Like,
Yeah, like there was a comment, we had a discussion around a daycare specific to that project where that was prohibited, right?
That was the phase 3 project, yeah.
Yeah.
And ultimately they had to put in uses that were
Just
open
community
to the
serving
public.
and at large, right? Yeah.
But they could build a daycare facility there, right?
Yeah, they just have
They
to
just can't-
offer it to everybody in town.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some restrictions based on the airport land use. You guys probably remember that conversation.
Right, I do remember that one. Okay. Well, thank you, Dan, for bringing up those points, but you have anything else you want to add to the conversation at this time?
No, I think that was just, a point I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Commissioner Kavanaugh?
none right now.
None right now, okay. And Commissioner Taylor, I definitely I see your point that, yeah, going back to the drawing board for the applicant would be costly and a time burden. And I mean, I'm sympathetic to the developer's plight of how long it takes to get done, and it seems like a 2-year entitlement period may seem like a long time, but it's not.
It doesn't seem to be if it's not working for most applicants.
Right.
I do concur that it, oh,
I was gonna say, it seems like we're going to see a request for an extension for phase 3.
Yeah, I don't see
would
how they
expect.
wouldn't. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
is that a reason to not grant an extension
No,
for phase 2?
not at all. Those are
Okay.
No,
completely-
that's going to
yeah.
be an issue for them because it's economy of scale, right? They're going to want to do as much grading as possible for both phases at the
It
same
does
time.
seem, I'm sorry, it does seem like it would be a really difficult reimagining, redesign, and
Right.
just another time delay.
Feel like we have some consensus up here. Does anybody see that they want to make any modifications to this? Would anybody like to make a motion?
I'll motion to adopt Resolution 2023-08, approving the Soaring Ranch Phase 2 time extension and project amendments subject to the recommended conditions of approval.
Second,
Chair Grove,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
No.
Commissioner Claren,
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor,
Yes.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
yes.
Okay, motion passes. Good luck with your project.
Thank you, Rick.
Alrighty, moving on to item 7.2, everybody's favorite, development code updates, telecommunication facilities, bike shares, and cleanup amendments. And Laura has another staff presentation for us.
All right. Our first topic this evening to talk about with the development code updates is telecommunications facilities. This is something that has been in the code for a long time. We've only made minor changes to it over the years, and it's an area we've known for a while needed to be updated to make sure we're compliant with the current state and federal laws. So we worked with BBK. We actually have Mackenzie here from by Zoom from BBK to answer any questions you might have about the specific telecommunications current requirements. What we're proposing in the code is to create a new permit type for wireless communications facilities. We'd have different review processes if it's a large or small facility. Large facility would go to zoning administrator, so it would be a public hearing. Small facilities would be a staff level approval by the community development director. One of the things we looked at is making sure we're complying with all the required shot clock time frames for these types of facilities. There's very specific, depending on the type of facility, how long we have to review it and approve it. So one thing we wanted to make sure is that we're complying with all of those. And then also to understand the areas where we have discretion and areas where we don't. So we essentially rewrote what was section 18.58.250 and created a new section, which is 18.58.270, called Wireless Communications Facilities. And that reflects all of the changes that we're proposing to bring things into compliance with the current requirements. And then also some amendments to go along with that to the allowed use tables, the setbacks table, and the definitions to make sure that all of those are also in compliance. And one thing I wanted to mention, I didn't include this in the resolution on accident, but we would make some changes to the allowed use tables to take out the telecommunications facilities reference, change it to wireless communications, and then reference the new code section. So if the commission's okay with adding that to the resolution, I would add that in before this goes to council for their consideration. So our recommendation on that would be to approve the proposed amendments to those, create the new code section, the tables, and the definitions. Our next discussion topic is bike shares. This is a new use that we're proposing to add to the development code. This is in part in response to the town council's goals, which include bike mobility and specifically mode shift programs. So what we're looking at adding would be a town-sponsored program for electric bicycles. that would be available for public use. There would be docking stations and electric bikes, and then an associated maintenance and storage yard to repair the broken bikes, store any bikes that have been misplaced until they can be returned to their docking stations. And the language that we've proposed would allow the bike shares on private property throughout the town, as well as in the right-of-way. Anything that's within the right-of-way would have to be approved by the engineering division through an encroachment permit. We're proposing to allow the use in all of the zoning districts in town except for rural residential and single-family residential. And then the maintenance and storage yard is proposed to be in the public facilities zone district as long as the business has an active agreement with the town to operate in the town limits. So as part of that, we're proposing a new code section, 18.58.072, and standards for the facilities, adding it to the use tables, and also the definitions. And so we can come back and talk about those more in depth. The recommendation would be to approve all of those amendments to the code section, the tables, and the definitions. And then we have a number of cleanup amendments that I was going to just run through really quickly. And again, we can come back to any that you want to discuss in more detail. So the first was the applicability section in the development code. We were proposing to add some clarifying language about time extensions. It's language that's already in the time extension chapter, but it's not in the other section of the code. And we've had a little bit of confusion a few times with people not understanding that those requirements apply. So we just wanted to cross-reference that to make that clear. The second was looking at removing campgrounds from the rural residential zoning district, since it's essentially a commercial lodging use, which is not consistent with the residential zoning district purpose. And then in terms of campgrounds in other zoning districts, they're currently allowed in the resource conservation and public facility zone districts. So we're proposing to remove them from those zones, since we also don't think that that's consistent with the purpose of those zone districts, but to continue allowing it in the rec zone, which is recreation. And it's specifically in the general plan identified it in the rec zone as an appropriate use. So we think that is an appropriate cleanup to make it consistent with that. And then there's also rural recreation facilities, which we were proposing to take out of the use tables. That's an old use that we think was carried over from the county days, which isn't something that we necessarily think that is appropriate in Truckee today. That would be things, I actually have the definition later in the presentation if you want to pull it up and actually read it if you didn't have a chance to. Next would be just adding some clarifying language about the state laws that currently have some exemptions from parking requirements that could potentially affect our in lieu parking fees if a project's not actually subject to providing parking. In the exterior lighting section, we don't currently have any standards for lighting for recreational facilities. So we proposed some height limits for that, and then also to update the references that talk about the Illuminating Engineering Society, since those were referencing an old organization name. Next are some changes to the setbacks table, which is table 3-3. And those, whereas they relate to air conditioning units and generators and where those go on the property, how close they are to the property line. We're trying to address noise concerns, safety concerns with propane tanks being close to the property line as well. Include a new reference for the new telecommunications requirements. The language in the table was confusing about what the garage setbacks are, so we wanted to clarify that. And then remove the play structure setback because we have a new section proposed in the residential accessory structure section that would address that. And then clarify the reduced setbacks based on height for other types of accessory structures. Next is snow storage. The first is just some language that was left out of a previous update in subsection B.1. There's language about snow storage easement requirements that should have also been in B.2, so we're proposing to fix that. And then our engineering division asked us to make a couple of additional changes. One is about the residential project storage areas, and then also about snow storage locations to comply with the engineering requirements. The floodplain variance was a small clarifying bit of language to address the exemption for public trails, paths, and sidewalks. In the parking and loading section, we're proposing to update the public assembly uses to be consistent with our current allowed uses. Add a coffee shop demand calculation, since that's now a separate use, make it consistent with the fast food restaurant calculation. Add some language about exemptions there as well, based on the state law. Changing the disabled and handicap parking references to accessible parking. That was a recommendation from the chief building official. And then along with that, we would change the disabled parking references that are throughout the code. The engineering division asked us to amend the surfacing requirements because they're, as written right now, they're not compliant with the town stormwater permit, and then add some parking exemption language to the downtown parking section, also based on the state law. Next are some changes to the sign code. One is to update the construction size sign requirements. That came up as we were looking at proposing a new type of sign for temporary construction staging areas, and we want it to be consistent between those two. Add mobile billboards to the prohibited signs, and remove foam board and fiberglass from the materials list, since those aren't consistent with the other guidance in the code to have natural materials for signs. Next is the child daycare facilities. This is another area that the town attorney reviewed and determined that our current code is not in compliance with the state requirements. So we proposed some changes to address that. Residential accessory structures, there are a few changes there. One was to add some language about the height of residential structures. Rather than specifying a specific maximum height, we added language that basically talks about the compatibility of the main structure and the accessory structure to make sure that those are compatible with each other. Then we previously had an allowance that you could build an accessory structure on an adjacent parcel at the because of the ADU laws that we have now, which basically allow any accessory structure to be converted to an ADU. We want to make sure that the accessory structure is on the same parcel as the main residence to make sure it's complying with that. We're proposing some proximity requirements to be consistent with what we currently require for ADUs to the detached living areas, and update the design standards so that we're incentivizing a larger detached area to be permitted as an ADU. In terms of the types of amenities that are included in that, and then adding standards for play structures. The temporary use section, we're clarifying the requirements for exempt temporary uses that are in the public right-of-way or on public lands, clarifying the time limits for certain types of temporary uses, and addressing annual recurring events, and adding the signage for temporary construction staging areas that I mentioned before. And then last, we have a number of new definitions. I didn't include all of the telecommunications definitions in here because that was quite a list, but it is all in the resolution. So these are to add an attached definition. We currently define what's detached, but not what's attached. To update the bed and breakfast definition to address hosted rentals, and since those are allowed now. Clarify what's allowed within a campground. Clarify the requirements for interior access within a dwelling, update the gross floor area definition to be consistent with how the building division calculates gross floor area, add a hosted rentals definition, update the kennel definition based on advice from our animal control division to be consistent with the municipal code, clarify the cabinet, counter, and equipment requirements in a kitchen and cooking facility, include space within a residential accessory structure in the living area definition. Mobile billboards, adding a new definition for that, and then updating the RV park definition for consistency with what we're proposing with the campground definition. So our recommendation would be to approve the cleanup amendments, and that would be the staff recommendation would be to adopt the resolution 2023-09, recommending to the town council approval of the amendments and recommending them to be exempt from CEQA. And then I added with the amendments proposed in this presentation, which would really be just adding those missing edits to the land use tables.
Thank you, Laura. Commissioner Claren, would you like to start with clarifying questions for staff?
Okay. So I have a lot of questions, and I'm a little confused. Most of this talks about changing the language, changing the definition, but it doesn't actually give the change. So I'm having heartburn over approving something. To me, it's like signing a contract that's blank. Well, we're going to do this, but you're going to have to eventually write the definitions and stuff. So why aren't we seeing them up front?
They're in the resolution. The resolution has all of the staff report referred to the attachment for all of the new code language.
You might be able to pull it up so that we could just have that as.
Yeah, I can do that.
We can go through them in the attachment.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So it's attachment 1 in your digital packet that has all the definitions.
And we do that for streamlining so that you get the subject matter in the staff report and then the details.
All right, I see it. I missed it. I didn't go all the way past the resolution.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes because there's just a lot to get through. So we can just bring it up here and that'll make it easier.
Oh.
Yeah, we used to try to embed them all in the staff report, and it got really confusing. So now they're just an attachment.
Yeah,
Got
just
it.
big picture. We call these cleanups because a lot of times they're derived out of just creating consistency. So they shouldn't be
I get that, but
huge.
I just didn't realize there was anything beyond the resolution. So this probably most of my questions are answered in here, but I'm going to throw them out anyway. Just the top ones that I had off the top of my head. So it talks about telecommunication setbacks. What are they?
So let me scroll to the section because it depends on the type of facility. It gets complicated. And I don't know, Chair Gove, would it be easier if we, if we, do you want to tackle the cleanups first or the discussion topics?
Okay, well, let's just finish clarifying questions for staff. So Mitch had a question. He's got his, he's finding his resource material there now. Commissioner Taylor, do you have any questions for staff at this point?
Not at this point. I mean, I will admit I'm not an expert in telecommunications, so reading it was kind of like, if they say this is right, I'm going to go with what the consultant is suggesting on this one because I can't, really, I can't say any otherwise. I just had kind of a general question about how, or if it was considered, rather than rewriting definitions if they exist elsewhere in the code, referencing that section instead so that in future times you only have one place to update rather than several different places throughout the whole code. But that's kind of, those are my questions really. Not that they're really questions.
Okay, Commissioner Freeman?
Yeah, I got a few questions. On bike share, does that include scooters?
No, just electric bikes.
So does that mean there is no approved scooter share program or any kind of electric scooters allowed?
I don't think that what they're talking about with this, so there's agreement that is, I don't know if it's a lease or exactly what it is, with a particular provider, and I believe it's only electric bikes that they're looking at.
Yeah, the scooters are definitely, they're wonderful, but they're a problem in some urban areas where they get all over the place.
Total nuisance, yeah.
Let's see, on the child care, the daycare facilities, I was curious, you clarify small and large. On a child care center, is there a limit to the size that can be, or does it have to just meet the kind of indoor-outdoor play area requirements?
So they have specific number of children for the small and large home daycares. And then a child care center is more of a commercial use. I'm not sure if there's a maximum. It might depend on how many teachers they have, what the age of the children are.
But nothing that is a town of Truckee requirement.
Right. We had some requirements in there previously that weren't consistent with the state law, so we're taking those out to make sure that we're abiding by what the state requires.
Okay. Last question. How many treehouse permits have you gotten?
There's not a process to permit tree houses.
But there is a new requirement.
No. So what we're looking at with the, I think you're looking at the play structures.
Oh, sorry, yeah, but it says play structures and tree houses.
So we're in the development code, we'll be putting some height limits and other standards in place, but the building division, I don't believe, has ever permitted a tree house under the building code.
So if you built an unpermitted treehouse, as long as it complies with the development code, it would be fine. No plumbing, no heat sources.
Yeah, plumbing and electricity would definitely trigger it.
It's above 30 inches above ground, though, so it need a rail and
No, nothing over 12 feet max height.
that what it
Top of the
says.
play structure. So I'm going to have to downsize mine. That's all I had.
All right, Commissioner.
Funny thing to talk about, but we've
Well,
had
it's
some,
real.
we've had some very creative interpretations of what constitutes a treehouse or other types of play structures. So that includes 35-foot tall ski jumps. We've had, I don't know, viewing decks. We've had lots of interesting things, and so it became a compatibility issue with a lot of the adjacent property owners. And then we started to look at, well, is it really sort of incidental and accessory to a single-family home if it's taller than it? So you can kind of see the evolution there.
I have reviewed plans for full-blown tree homes in Martis Camp where it's a house in the trees. For the
And we
kids.
had that issue at Architectural Standards in Taladana, too. What's a play structure, what's not? Same issue.
Mitch, to your question, this is one of the setback references. I believe this is just the general wireless facility setbacks, and says it can't be located within the front side or street side setback, and can't extend beyond the property lines. If it's a zone district that doesn't have setbacks, then it would require 20 feet from the front property line and 10 feet from the side or rear.
Just like anything else.
But
Okay, Commissioner Kavanaugh, do you have questions?
Yes,
And
I
then-
have questions. First, I did read the things, and sorry, the attached document. Thanks. It would have been easy to miss. I do have some
Thank you.
general questions, and then I have some kind of nitpicky things. So I don't know which I should go into first.
So let's start with general questions,
Okay.
and then I'll suggest to answer
I
Laura's.
haven't finished either.
Yeah, Laura's question. Once we go through these general questions, then let's go back to the agenda and go line item by line item, starting with the telecommunications, if that makes sense.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, so general questions, well, I guess they relate to specific points in the changes. So, and then there's picky things on the on the suggested edits. So Chairman Gove, would you prefer that I wait until we go item by item
Yes.
then?
Yeah. So any overarching questions you have right now, let's just go ahead and get those out of the way, but then we'll go ahead and move into item by item, and then we can just grind through it.
Okay, so these actually relate to where else this might affect. So residential accessory structures. I looked at the standards. No, I'll wait until the specific part on that. The zoning clearance item. It looked like we removed a 30-day requirement to turn something around under the streamlining process. Is that 30-day requirement required elsewhere, or is there other language somewhere else that enforces or requires that 30-day turnaround, or are we just allowing a little more time?
So the zoning clearance and the minor modification were the two that had the same language about, I think it said we had to approve it within 30 days, which is not something we have with any of other land use permits. They're subject to permit streamlining, so we have certain timeframes we have to meet, but that was just kind of an odd thing that was in the zoning clearance. It was copied over, I think, when we added the minor mod process. And since it's not consistent with how we process applications, we thought we should reword that.
So it's required elsewhere? Or it's just not required? Do state streamlining requirements require that type of turnaround that overarchingly it's required by you even if it's not shown there?
Yeah, the Permit Streamlining Act requires us to review a project for completeness within 30 days. It doesn't say we have to approve a project within 30 days. And then there's special timeframes for telecommunications, accessory dwelling units. The state has all kinds of different timelines that we have to follow, but for just a typical application, they don't have that requirement to actually approve it within that 30 days.
Okay, thanks. We'll get to that, I think, when we get to that language. I think I understand what you just said, though. Thank you.
Well, and I would just note too that we have a different section in here for zoning verification, which is different than zoning clearance. That's just for us to go through and determine if what's on site is consistent with the zoning. And we did strike out the 30 days in that text and had it at the director's determination because that's not a permit streamlining issue. It's just something we offer applicants to help them understand what they're buying most of the time.
So it could just take longer.
Or less time. I mean, the zoning verifications are really just a staff permit review. So if we can get them done faster, we try so that they're not sitting around. Because like I said, most of the time it comes up when someone's looking at purchasing a property and they want to know if there's any outstanding zoning violations or if they're doing any kind of refinance or something like that.
Okay. Okay, I'll hold the rest of my comments until we get to the individual items then.
Okay, sounds good. So we're an hour and 15 in. I think there may be a lot of sifting through this stuff. Anybody interested in doing a short recess? Okay. And then that'll give you some time to maybe take a look at some of the other things.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So it is 6:15. Sorry, 6:15 right now. We'll take a 10-minute recess and reconvene at 6:25.
they've set forth.
Okay, that's I think my only question.
Commissioner Claren, any questions about telecommunications portion?
I was going to ask what a shot clock is, but Mackenzie just answered. So no more questions.
Okay, so I think we can go back to the first slide and take a look at what the next item.
Are we going to be approving one big resolution for everything?
Yes.
Yes, typically what happens is we go through, and if there's anything we want to see changed, we give the staff language.
Got it.
Okay, bike shares. Commissioner Freeman had a question about bike shares. Do you want to take a deeper dive on the scooter portion of bike shares or anything like that, Dan?
Going to see scooters. Who is the vendor?
I don't actually know. Truck, maybe?
Okay. Is there like any kind of verbiage or limit to like the number of consecutive bikes we could see in one place?
That's a good question. Let me pull up the section and see if we have a limit on the number in a particular location. I don't remember off the top of my head.
While you're looking that up, do you guys, or is there a plan for where these bikes go in the winter?
It talked about a maintenance yard.
Yeah, I believe they're at the old corporation yard, and that there's a fully developed enforcement strategy as part of the contract with the provider that dictates what they can and can't do, and then there's triggers that happen if they're out of compliance through our transportation manager.
Okay, and so then it's their responsibility to maintain and go if there's bikes that have gone missing or errantly lying about, they could collect them and.
Yes, that's my understanding,
Yeah,
that there's
and
a
then-
whole process that's been developed through I'll call it an MOU or franchise agreement.
And then at the end of the season, they all go back to the warehouse?
I believe so. Yep. I haven't actually seen it, but that's my understanding in some conversations with Alfred.
Is there a threshold, like if 80% of the bikes are being trashed, do we kill the project?
That I don't know. But we could certainly ask and follow up with an email, not tonight, but
And
later,
then
yeah.
how is the bike usage monitored? Like, do we know if people are using them or not? Is it worth the tax dollars being spent on it? What's the baseline, and then how do we know we're getting our money's worth for it?
I don't know, but I'm certain that that's included in the entire contract that's been prepared.
So there's a way to monitor the usage to make sure that people are actually accessing.
It has to be
the program.
app driven. Everything's
Yeah.
app driven. You're going to go to the bike. You're going to sign up. You're going to have an app on your phone. It's going to track your
Like the
mileage.
Citibank thing, the
But-
City Bike.
Yeah, it's got to be. Then
Yeah.
they're going to want all that data. Yeah, there's going to be a ton of data.
Just like
from it.
we're doing with the microtransit.
Is the town actually spending money on this though, or just allowing this provider to?
I think we're allowing the provider and creating the regulations to allow them to operate in the town.
So I guess I'd be curious. It looks like we're now allowing these in almost every zoning district. Like, is there a number allowed in any zoning district? Is there a number of maximum bikes allowed in one area? Is there a distance between one installation versus the next installation?
Those are good questions. There's nothing in here that talks about a total number or a proximity, requirement. Those are things we could look at adding in if you think that that's important.
I do think it's important because I would hate to see 20 bikes on one side of downtown and right across the street 20 more bikes, and then 100 feet away another group
Or
of
a
bikes.
mile away, there's none.
You would have to think that the vendor would come in and, from a capitalistic approach, want to take a look at the data and the usage, and they would be having a pretty good feel for like, okay, we've got people looking for bikes in this area from the app usage or whatever, or we've got 20 bikes over here that are not being used. Like that's a capital investment that they're losing money on. You would think that they would want to reallocate it somewhere.
Yeah, I just wonder, what is the initial outlay going to be, and have they, are they going to submit a plan? And presumably that's at staff level to review that, or whoever's signing this contract.
So there's the contract, and I believe Luke, the planner that worked on this, I believe he said that the town will be able to decide exactly where these are all going, so there will be some discretion there. But then I believe that the zoning clearance process is how we would approve on private property where these are going.
But it isn't almost, except for RR and RS zoning, every zone every other district it's allowed, correct?
Yeah, and the thought behind that was that if it's as broadly available, then it would be more successful in terms of the program. If you have concerns about certain zones and the compatibility and think that maybe it's not appropriate, then we could definitely tweak this language.
I'm just pulling up some of Alfred's information since he's not here, but it looks like, so B-Cycle is the vendor that we have right now, and he's still doing a permit process. So that allows for him to review with any other vendor that might want to come in at some point in time, sort of the terms that he's put together. So we had talked to him maybe a couple weeks ago about, do you expect to see, other vendors that are interested in the near term? And he said no, because they went through an RFP process. So B-Cycle was pretty much the one that submitted. So I feel like even though we're talking about what can be allowed in the zoning districts, there's still a secondary process that someone would have to go to. It's not like they can just put out a docking station of their own and just start operating.
Are we only opening it up to one vendor? So we're not going to see 3 different?
For right now, yes, because that's who was selected through the RFP process that we did. I'm sure at some point in the future, Alfred will assess, is that still the right approach? Do we need to go back and do another process for it, or decide how many permits we want to issue or whatever it is? But it's kind of, you kind of have to try it to see how it works first. And we did have a bit of a precursor to that in the fire station lot downtown, where we had bikes kind of in there doing bike share before this to kind of see what we thought about it. But this is just a much more formalized process through it with a permit.
What were the results of the bike share that were down by the fire department?
Well, what we learned through that process is that you need to have more docking stations because people might want to take their bike, from point A to point B, and there weren't enough point Bs. So we definitely learned that. And then because of that and talking to B-Cycle, we were starting to look at where these most likely to get used. And so we started with, let's look at public facilities first, because that would be sort of the easiest from a permission standpoint, then homeowners association, properties, and then sort of like where are the major amenities that people would want to go to, and sort of what does that look like with private properties. So he's trying to build a network with B-Cycle of having enough docking stations to ensure that the bikes are getting used.
How are the private property owners protected?
I don't think we know that at this point. I mean, I'm assuming that B-Cycle has something that they work out with the private property owners. We just ask for proof that the private property owner is in agreement to have the docking station on their property.
For what it's worth, I'm looking here on the B-Cycle website, and it looks like they have probably 30 or 35 cities across the country. So they're established enough to hopefully have some good data and know what they're doing.
Commissioner Taylor?
I don't know if this would either, go in the zoning code, but it actually might go in a different place. But if it becomes evident that a dockless bike share system would work better in Truckee, would that be something that we need to have a provision in the zoning or this code to allow, or would that be handled later if it would come up?
Yeah, I think that would be a future amendment if, like Danielle said, if Alfred assesses and decides that a different form of bike share would work better, then we could come back and change this.
I was assuming these were e-bikes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you do dockless e-bikes? You have to charge them somewhere, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and programs that I'm familiar with, they have, people collect them, charge them, put them back out.
Gotcha.
And rotate
Right.
them
Like the
through
scooters that are, yeah.
Yeah, similar to the scooter infrastructure.
Alfred, I think that in other cities that have allowed things, like Lime bikes and Lime scooters and other things, the having the docking stations typically is better in ensuring the bikes are usable versus being left in obscure places that aren't going to be available to everyone to find. So you kind of avoid the clutter issue that happens sometimes when there's no docking station, or just the accountability that goes with the docking stations. And it's just a expectation of someone who has the app and go in and say, here's where the bike is supposed to be at this location, and that's easy for me to get to. I can drive there. There's a parking area or walk to it if hopefully they're close enough. But if it's in the middle of the Legacy Trail, that's not going to benefit our community necessarily.
Any other questions about bike shares? Okay. Next item.
Cleanups. First was the time extension language.
Let's take a look.
Was this just not covered prior?
Yeah, just what it didn't cross-reference the requirement to comply with the current standards. As we talk about time extensions in 2 different places in the code, and only one of them had the more specific language.
Okay, so we're just importing this from the other part of the code.
Yeah, just essentially cross-referencing the
Cross-reference.
code section.
Okay, can we move on from time extension? Everyone's nodding in agreement.
Next was the residential zoning districts removing campgrounds as an allowed use.
Okay, so campgrounds comes out of residential, goes into recreational, education, and public assembly.
Yeah, and if we scroll down here,
Are any campgrounds currently affected by this change?
I'm sorry, what?
Are any campgrounds that exist today affected by this change?
No, so we have the Tahoe Donner one, which is in a recreation zone, and then the state park. I think those are the only 2 actual campgrounds we have in the town.
Is there any possibility that any of the existing recreational designated area is there any possibility that someone could or would be able to put a campground there, given its intended use in the land use element?
In the recreation zone?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an allowed use and we would be proposing to keep it there because it's identified in the general plan as an appropriate use in that zone. That's a use permit, so they would have to come before the planning commission to address any compatibility issues.
Wasn't there an application that was pending for a campground?
There was a preliminary application.
Preliminary application, yeah, just east of Old Greenwood?
Yes, off of Glenshire Drive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the privately held recreation lands, is that generally in the hands of like HOAs and community association type entities?
It's probably a mix. I did include the map in case we wanted to look at that. Let me see if I can pull that up. Let's see. So that's the zoning map. And the rec zone is this kind of darker blue color. So it's kind of throughout some of the subdivisions, and then there's a big part of it here. The darker red is resource conservation, I believe, which is, I think, where that project that Chair Gove was referencing was located, which would be in one of the zones.
So that looks like, is that Prosser Lake there, the big blue part that you're kind of pointing to? I mean, who owns all that? There's obviously a campground out there, but that's federal, state?
I'm not sure. Do you know who owns like this property up here?
Yeah.
I guess I'm just trying to figure out whether we're, I get that we're saying that a rental, essentially a rental lodging area is not compatible with residential use, but I don't know if we're precluding the development of another campground by saying, or by limiting too much to land that would never be able to be developed into a campground.
So Danielle just clarified that's Old Greenwood.
So
it is private.
The south side of 80, that's in blue, that you can kind of see it in there, but in the background, the golf course, but it happens to still be zoned rec. But yeah, that's Old Greenwood. And then on the north side is the open space that was created with Grays. And I feel like the land trust acquired that open space.
Yeah, if that's the case, if it's land trust, then there actually is potential that they could do something with that. Okay.
Any other comments, concerns about the campgrounds?
Chair Gove, you didn't need Mackenzie for anything else, right?
No, she's the consultant for telecommunications. No, Mackenzie, thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day. Appreciate your help.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Okay, so we good to move on from this one? Yep, nodding in agreement. Yep, okay. Laurel, moving on.
Okay, so this one was just adding, we just added language that says, unless it's exempt from parking requirements for state law.
Hey, we good with that?
I'm not good with it.
Not good with it.
Yeah,
Commissioner
it's just a
Kavanaugh.
wording thing. It's
Okay.
just, sorry, I'm supposed to wait until you
No, you're
recognize me.
fine.
Thank you.
That's quite all right.
So it's just a wording thing. It seems to me like you ought to parenthesize unless exempted by state law after the word fee, because otherwise the whole paragraph is kind of referred to by unless exempted by state law. Unless that's just a normal lingo for this code, I would just rearrange the sentence a little bit, and I'll try not to get too picky with this stuff, but
So what we're
parking
trying.
impact fee, unless exempted by state law, may be paid.
Okay, I think what we were trying to say is because the parking itself might be exempt from providing any parking.
Parking, unless exempted by state law, impact fee may be paid. It's.
Could we say something like unless a project is exempted from providing parking by state law?
That would work.
Is that better?
Okay, so let's go ahead and start getting some notes going about the amendments that we'll be making for this, please.
Okay. Got that.
Okay, let's move on to the next item.
Okay, so the next was the exterior lighting for recreation facilities. Oop. Okay, so that was the reference, the outdated reference to the society, and then here was the height limit. Basically, we just said it has to comply with the IES when they have different standards depending on the type of recreation facility it is.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Kavanaugh.
It's a small thing in paragraph B there at the top of the page. IES is already defined on the previous page. And in the paragraph immediately below that, paragraph 2, you still have the old name in it. So that also needs updating.
Okay.
Since we have new commissioners too, it's okay if you happen to know what your changes might be ahead of time to forward them to us, because sometimes what we can do is put them on the screen, and then sometimes visually we can go through them quickly in the meeting. So just for future meetings, if you happen to be done ahead of time, we would welcome those and can help facilitate the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for that advisement. I didn't know if 2 p.m. today was early enough.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, depending on what the planner's kind of working on, but we might be able to. It's always helpful for us to at least know what they are.
I'll try to do my homework a little earlier next time.
Okay. Were there any other comments on that one?
Nope, moving on.
Okay, so then we had setback table. Okay,
Don't worry, I'll get you. I'm starting to picking up how this is going to flow here.
Okay, so we could start at the top. So air conditioning equipment and generators were in the setback that required a reduced 5-foot setback previously. And based on the fact that those can be pretty noisy, we're recommending that they meet the normal setback standards on the sides and rear. And then garages, we just referred to the section that allows reduced garage setbacks, but it depends on the orientation of the structure and whether you meet certain other criteria. So we wanted to just refer to that section for more information on that. Propane tanks right now have a 0 setback, which we thought could be a safety concern, so we were recommending 5 feet.
About the propane tanks, there's got to be an accessibility issue for the vehicle that services them, right? I mean, that's probably why they have a 0 setback.
I mean,
they've got to be able to get those rigs up to it to fill them up.
So there's a footnote about it that says it has to comply with side, rear, and interior setback requirements of the town building code and the Truckee Fire Protection District, but we don't know what those would be. I mean, the interior setbacks in the building code are typically depending on if you have like a fire rated building or, so I'm not sure how that applies to a propane tank. So you think if it was 5 feet away from a property line, it could be an access issue?
Well, I'm not sure, I guess is my point. I've never serviced propane tanks. I do know that they are generally oriented towards the street in a way that those trucks and service people can get to them. I would assume that that's why that before it had a 0 setback would be just a comment.
Okay.
Anybody else
I
have
think
any?
it used to be like, I think I'm aging myself, but before natural gas was in Truckee, I thought it was 40 feet from structures and 10 feet from property line.
Oh.
But
Okay, well,
Yeah, I think when we talked about this, we thought you definitely don't want it too close to the structure, but you also probably don't want it right on top of your neighbor's property line, ideally.
no, sometimes that ends up being closer to your neighbor's structure than your own.
Right.
well, 4 feet, I suppose, sounds fine. Just
Okay.
curious.
5 feet.
Yeah, 5 feet.
Sorry, I stand corrected.
Then the other one was the outdoor play equipment has that new section that we'll go through later. Telecommunications. Oh, I moved this here, but then I meant to update it to say the wireless communications facilities, which would be 2.70, not 2.50. So I'll make a note of that. And then the section down here was a little confusing before because for like if you're building a shed and it's more than 120 square feet, we wanted to clarify or greater than 10 feet in height, then you have to do what's required for the main structure.
Where's note 5?
I'm sorry?
Where is note 5?
Next page.
Oh,
No, I
it cut off.
I didn't find
Sorry. It
Maybe
must-
you just
that's
didn't
weird.
include that page in this, but I didn't find it in the code.
Oh, you know what? I think we were thinking about adding a new footnote and then did not. So that's fine. I can clean that up. Sorry. Yeah, because we were originally thinking about putting specific height limits in here, and then it just got too complicated. So we said, okay, if it's over 120 and over 10 feet, you do standard setbacks. If it's less than 120, greater than 6 feet, but previously it had no limit, so you could have a structure that's under 120 and then kind of unlimited height, which we don't think that was really the intent
an
of
obelisk.
Yeah, right. So we thought that if it's less than 10 feet, then you get the reduced setback. It could be taller, but then it just has to be outside the setback. So that's why we proposed that clarification.
Okay. Did you find anything else in there, Coral?
Okay. Next is snow removal or snow storage. So this was the note it was up here in B1 where it says up to half the required snow storage area when we're talking about the easement. We just forgot to include it in B2 when we wrote this. And then this was just a minor edit that the engineering division asked us to make to say that you have to demonstrate that the required amount of on-site snow storage area can be fully accommodated on each residential parcel. And then this was another requirement that they asked us to add to be in compliance with their requirements. And this was just talking about the paved surfaces being contiguous, so you're not driving over non-driving area to get to the snow storage area. And then some language about ramping.
Everybody okay with this? Okay, moving on.
Okay. Next was the floodplain. We just added public here, since the exemption, from our understanding, has always been if you're building, a trail or a sidewalk or something like that, that's exempt from meeting the variance. If someone wanted to build a trail on private property, then they would need to go through the process to show that the floodplain's being protected as part of that work.
Okay.
This is where we updated how we're describing the public assembly uses, which used to be called churches and places of worship and meeting halls. And then theaters and event spaces, we added that in a previous code update. We just didn't update the parking language at the same time.
Alrighty.
And then here was adding the coffee shop to the other restaurants. And then there were a few other parking ones. So under the state law, current state law, if you're within a half mile of a major transit stop, you're exempt unless there's a few caveats to that. So we basically just said that you have to provide parking unless you're exempt. And then here were the changes that the chief building official recommended based on calling it accessible parking.
Makes sense.
Good job, Mike Ross.
One question, do we need to define ADA as Americans with Disability Act, or can we just leave it ADA?
Oh, you mean right here where it says include ADA accessible?
Yeah.
Is it defined somewhere earlier in the document?
Yeah, it's got to
perhaps?
be, right?
It may be somewhere else, but I can check, and if not, we can add that.
Okay.
Okay. And we may want to tweak this language similar to the other.
Coral, you want to weigh in on this one here?
So this one's just saying that these requirements apply unless it's exempt.
You could just move it to the end of that sentence, but this one works a little better than the last one.
Okay. Okay, I could mirror the other language that we talked about earlier if you think that would be better. Okay.
Next.
Okay. Signs. So for the temporary construction yards, we were proposing 15 square feet as a new allowance. We had this previous reference that was referring back to itself, which didn't make any sense. I think that must have just been an error in a previous code update. So I took that out. Previously, it was 20 square feet and a maximum of 10 feet from natural grade.
And why the reduction in size?
So when we were talking about the temporary construction staging areas, and we started thinking about, what size sign you really need for, so that if someone's going to that location for some reason, you obviously want to be able to identify it, you want people to know where they're going, but not necessarily have, a giant sign for advertising purposes, for example. If you would be more comfortable with the 20, we could, talk about that.
A 4x8 sign is what, 32 square feet, right?
Yeah.
And that's, if
Hard to
that's
see
a
enough.
staging yard, that's
Yeah.
not that big of a sign, I don't
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. So you want
Well,
to
I
suggest
looked up-
32?
I'm suggesting leaving it at 20. 32 would be better, but
If 30, well, I don't want to see a giant blaring sign across the
Right.
street from me. If that's a standard size for a banner you might create or a sign you might have, provided it meets the other requirements, why not go with something that's a standard size?
well, I talked to the sign guy about the sign materials, and 4x8 was what he used as an example.
Does he make it out of foam board or?
That's what we were talking about, so we'll get to that.
Okay. So recommendation is to leave it at 20?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Oh, this was adding mobile billboards to the prohibited signs. We already have billboards, not allowed, new billboards, so.
Yeah, we're going to discuss what the definition of a mobile billboard is in the definitions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And then here's the materials. Foam board and fiberglass. So really what we've been trying to move toward over the past few years is using natural materials for signs, primarily wood or metal. We still had this language in here about allowing a foam board or fiberglass sign.
I have major heartburn over some of this. So, foam board being what's used for sandblasted type signs, is that the foam board you're even talking about? I talked to a sign maker in town here, and he wasn't even sure what we meant by foam board, but if that's what you're talking about, he says going with wood doesn't last nearly as long as some of these other products. Once you have once you finish a lot of these products, you can't tell what the material is, and you're adding a ton of cost on a sign for, in my concern is for starting businesses that are starting out and already have to go through TIs and the permitting process and all this, and then you're adding thousands of dollars on top of their startup costs just for a sign.
So we do allow not just wood, but naturally materials that appear natural. So plywood, MDO, MDF. So those aren't actually wood; they just look like wood.
They are wood.
Well,
They're wood products.
I guess.
but yeah.
I guess
they're
not like
glued.
it's
They
not like we're
glue
requiring
dust.
like a cedar,
So what's the problem
sign.
with foam board or fiberglass?
I think the recommendation was to take that language out just because it's not, a natural material.
But I think what Commissioner Clarence' point is that as the materials evolve, that you're able to create a superior product that looks like a natural product. That may be more environmentally.
And I use an example in historic downtown Truckee. We actually allow Trex and fiberboard, which for me, that has nothing to do with historic anything, and that's allowed. But on a sign, it's not. That doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Yeah, I mean, if the commission's not comfortable with removing that, we can definitely
I don't know what anybody
include
else
that in
thinks
your
about that, but
recommendation.
It's really a cost for startup businesses. If we're trying to be business friendly, then we don't want ugly signs, but we don't want them.
Don't want to hamstring them out of another cost-effective alternative.
Yeah, when they're first getting started, that's the toughest time.
It does say here, oh, sorry, it does say
Commissioner
here.
Freeman, I'm sorry. Were you about to say something, Dan? Commissioner Kavanaugh?
It does say that, you have to have these three-dimensional features, and it has to look like a natural material. Are all those things accomplishable with all these materials? If they are, then I don't see why you couldn't leave them in.
Well, why couldn't you even truncate the sentence even more? It says painted engineered products and materials intended to imitate or appear like natural materials. Period. And
Are also allowed, period.
What's that?
Materials intended to imitate or appear like natural materials are also allowed.
Yeah, are also allowed.
I guess I wondered, how about acrylic? That's not specified here. There's a lot of acrylic signs.
I mean,
out
it's
there.
just, so by truncating that sentence, the design intent is that it's supposed to look like a natural product. And if it doesn't, then that's not going to meet the requirements.
I mean, I
right?
just went through applying for a sign in a downtown business. It was a rigorous process. We ended up with a very, very nice sign. The process was a little challenging because it was like, can we see a mock-up of this sign? And at that point, you just make the sign to show you what it's going to look like. But I think if somebody wants to make a sign and say, is this approvable? That's almost what the process needs to be.
Or at least come up with a
I mean,
material.
how about
like,
3D printing?
Yeah.
If someone wants to 3D print a sign.
And the technologies are changing relatively rapidly. I know, again, I'm going to bring up Tahoe Don and architectural standards, but they initially said no fake rock because in the 70s, fake rock looked like fake rock. But today it doesn't anymore. So as the products, I don't think we want to hamstring ourselves or lock ourselves into this kind of a box. Mostly, again, for me, it's starting businesses and trying to keep their costs down so they can actually get started.
Well, or just any business. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the goal of any business is to try and find places to streamline costs. And, I mean, it's hard enough to do it up here in this environment anyway.
That's true.
Should we just put a note in here, to be approved by staff?
Well, I think where Dan and Dave are going, painted engineered products are intended to appear like natural materials can be used. Boom, and get rid of the rest of that.
This just isn't an all-inclusive list of every material out there.
Yeah, it
And so
shouldn't
you're like,
be.
how do you decide what to include and what to omit?
It shouldn't be. I think it should just be that we're trying to imitate or appear like natural materials.
Yeah, we can take out the rest of that sentence if you think that would be
The only concern I would have, and this is more thinking like life cycle of a sign, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, but there's like plastic is not called out in this list as being allowed. Do we want to stay away from plastic and use these more, natural materials that would, disintegrate over time, not to make them less, lasting? And then my other comment might be, in order to avoid that expensive sign when you're starting up as a business, would a compromise be like a temporary sign design that, 2 years or so would have to be replaced with something that's more lasting and made out of those natural materials?
Well, I think Commissioner Claren's point that he was making before is that as the technology evolves, there are products out there that look like natural materials that are going to outlast a piece of cedar or a piece of redwood.
Sure, but then we also get to the point, well, how do we dispose of that when that business is no longer with us? Most of that plastic still can't be recycled or reused. Wood can be composted. So it's just another aspect to kind of consider when we're thinking about these things, when we're looking at, how do we want Truckee to look, and then what do we want Truckee's, legacy to be related to some of these things that often go overlooked.
Well, if you're talking environmentally, if you're constantly redoing your sign because it's made out of wood and it's wearing out in 5 years, that's not helping either.
Yeah, I mean, there's energy inputs into that as well. I'm in favor of trying to make this as simple as possible,
But I also think we should hold, especially downtown businesses, to a high sign standard, so we don't get junky signs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we should.
I think this does that.
With taking out the language from including, through, et cetera?
And I think by not hamstringing everybody, you can get more creative with how you create your signs.
Okay.
I'm looking online. There's some cool fiberglass signs that are basically made out of a mold, and then it's fiberglass, and you couldn't tell that it's not a organic material.
Sure, and if it's properly maintained, the life cycle of that fiberglass could be decades.
And again, downtown, Trex decking, it's all over 1882.
So we could either leave the language as it is now, which includes the foam board and fiberglass, or one suggestion was to take out that part of the sentence. So,
yeah, that was my suggestion, and I'm sticking with it.
I like Dave's suggestion, just like natural materials, stop, boom.
I concur. Take out the language between including and et cetera, and then provide a good level of review so that where we can, we have natural materials that are compostable, recyclable. But if the best solution is something that doesn't have to be maintained with energy and paint and whatever, varnish, stain, then that can be, you can look at that during the review process. We'll just let you do it.
Commissioner Taylor, you okay with that?
Yeah, that works.
Commissioner Freeman, you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, let's move on, please.
okay.
That's this whole page.
That's pictures. This was the child care facility updates.
Commissioner Kavanaugh, you have some suggestions in this language here?
Yes, of course, it's not actually in the paragraph, in a place where you made an edit, though. Number A2, I think that should say principal with an AL.
Oh, right here. Principal.
Okay.
Moving on.
Were there any other edits to
Nope,
that?
we're moving on.
Okay.
Multifamily. I mean, based on that, you could have a 600 square foot apartment and have, I think, 14 kids in it.
They really broaden, what we have to allow. Okay, residential accessory uses and structures. So the first is that language I was talking to you about, rather than putting in specific height limits, just saying that aside from detached garages and agricultural structures, the height of the residential accessory structure shall not exceed the height of the main residence to ensure the accessory structure is incidental to and architecturally compatible with the main residence. Then the next was that language we previously had about putting your accessory structure on an adjacent parcel.
So you would have to do a lot line adjustment if you wanted to do that at this point?
Yeah, so that if when you then go to convert it later, it's all one
All
parcel.
part of them, yeah, okay. Any objections to any of that?
No.
No.
Makes
Okay.
a lot of sense.
Then the proximity requirements, these we just copied over from the ADU section. Basically, it says if you have less than an acre, then your detached living area has to be within 100 feet. And then it goes up to 200 feet if you have 2 or more acres.
Okay, any objections to that? Moving on.
And then in terms of we just clarified the plumbing and electrical. There was a previous code language had some interesting language there about the water closet and lavatory. So we changed it to single one-well sink with a maximum surface area of 2 square feet and 1 toilet.
Why do we care if it's a single or a double vanity?
That was just the previous language. This is a single one-well sink. That's typical of what we have with like a wet bar. We allow one sink that's 2 square feet.
Is this the part where you're improving the number of amenities that can be included in an ADU? That wasn't clear to me which part of these accessory dwelling unit or, what was the other word? Residential accessory structures. It wasn't really clear to me which of these changes incentivize larger detached living areas with additional amenities.
So
can you point me to which ones those are?
Yeah, so we looked at some other changes, one of which was a maximum size for the detached living area to make it smaller than what's allowed now, because right now you can have 800 square feet if you have less than an acre and 1,200 square feet. So we looked at maybe changing those, decided to defer that until we had more time to, look at what might make sense for that. So that kind of left us with the plumbing, just clarifying this language, and then the proximity requirements. And really, I think big picture, the idea was, rather than someone building a detached living area, like if we really do want to incentivize people to build ADUs, we should, maybe make it so that if you want, a full, bathroom and a, more plumbing and more, more flexibility, I guess, bigger units, things like that, then that would encourage people to do an ADU instead of trying to do a detached living area that's 1,200 square feet and doesn't have a kitchen in it, because that would be really the difference.
Okay.
I'm confused. So why do we care how many toilets there are?
So it's a detached living area. It's really just supposed to be like a bedroom or a rec room or something. So the idea in limiting what you can put in it, one of the things we're trying to discourage is the illegal conversion of these spaces to ADUs without permits.
Mm-hmm.
By if you have multiple bathrooms and it's set up so that someone could easily convert it to put a kitchen in, then, we run into issues with that. So this is just an attempt, I think, to limit what you can do in a detached living area to avoid those types of situations.
So to avoid somebody illegally converting a large bathroom into half of a kitchen or something?
Or having multiple bathrooms in a detached living area could encourage them to turn that into an independent living space without going through the building permit process to do that.
So just so I'm clear, what you're doing is you're constraining the detached living areas in order, and that is how you're, without affecting anything on the ADU side.
Right.
You're just making it harder to do this so people would be more likely to do that.
Because ADUs are so flexible
Okay.
these days with the state law.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, and then the language that we kind of touched on earlier about the play structures and tree houses was the height. And then we pulled this definition from, I believe, from a different jurisdiction to have a size limit. And really one of the things we were concerned about with this, especially with the tree house, is, there could be safety concerns with someone building a large structure that's not permitted and doesn't have to go through a permit process.
Doesn't know what they're doing and it's not safe.
Right. So so keeping it look closer to the ground and smaller in size, we thought would help address that, rather than saying, you can't do it, because obviously people are going to want to have this type of thing. Maybe there's a way to do it more safely.
Okay. Let's move on.
This was just taking out the old telecommunications section. And that's the new section. Okay. So in terms of events in the right-of-way that are exempt from the temporary use permit requirement. We had previously added language to the code about events that impact the right-of-way in terms of parking or traffic or something like that require a special event permit. So we just added that language here to make it clear that even if it's exempt from a temporary use permit, if you're going to close down a street or something for a special event, you need to get a special event permit.
Okay.
And then when it's on public lands, we clarified that it needs to be operated by a public agency on public land, and rather than outside vendors, in order to be exempt. It's not to say you couldn't do it, you would just need to go through the process. And then this is where we had proposed the 15 square foot sign. This would be temporary staging areas for basically town projects. We could change that to 20 feet if you wanted it to be consistent with.
I think that makes sense to be
Yeah.
consistent.
Okay.
So I'm a little confused. Can you go back up to E?
Yeah. Which one? E?
Commercial activities conducted on by outside vendors shall not be exempt from the town's permitting. Any events which impact public areas shall be. So these uses must be operated by a public agency.
Yeah, so if, say, the rec district wants to have an event on their own property, they can do that. They don't have to get a temporary use permit if they meet this criteria. But if there was a different entity that wanted to use their property for some kind of event, then they would still need to get a temporary use permit. So this is just talking about the exempt. It may have cut that. Oh, yeah. If you want to fall under this exemption.
Okay.
So if a public agency hires a vendor for their their event, but they're conducting, the agency's conducting the event.
It says, yeah, it has to be operated by the public agency.
See,
So if the agency is operating it by hiring an outside vendor, rather than somebody else requesting to use a public space, have we covered that eventuality?
I think that would still be operated by the agency
Yeah,
if
that
they're
seems
putting
to
on
get
the
a little
event.
nitpicky in my mind. Like
I think if they
let's
were
say-
renting the space out to someone else to use,
right.
that's what
If
we're trying to address.
If the PUD wanted to throw an employee appreciation party and they hired a caterer to come in, you know.
Yes, if that's what's meant by operated by the public agency, I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
how does Truckee Thursdays fit into this?
That's in the right of way, so that's a special event.
So they get a permit.
They get a permit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on. We're going to change temporary signage to add to 20 square feet. Right.
Got it?
Okay. Next. Okay.
Okay, so this was talking about the temporary use permit. If there's impacts to the surrounding land uses that are in excess of what the primary use of the site is, then we're basically saying you would need to go through a different process to allow that type of use because those impacts need to be addressed.
Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Okay. Let's move on. Thank you.
And then in terms of the outdoor events and sales, we were proposing to allow 45 days for those. We kind of looked at what businesses typically do, and if they have weekend tent sales, you could have them every weekend of basically between Memorial Day and Labor Day with 45 days. So versus 90 days would be pretty much every day of the summer, which seems maybe excessive.
So can you give an example of this? Like talking about like temporary signage in front of like Granite Chief, for example? Is that what you're talking about?
It would be like tent sales, like
Uh-huh.
some of the like backcountry sports hub. They get typically a temporary use permit every year to do tent sales, and they usually do them on the weekends and on holidays.
What about a sandwich board sign like in front of Zano's,
That'd be a temporary sign permit.
which is still 90 days?
That would be under a separate part of the code. That would be under the sign code.
Okay.
So there's that change. And then we were trying to address when people are doing sort of recurring events that happen every year. There are cases where it becomes more of a permanent use. But,
Example?
PJs would be one with the weddings? The weddings that they get a temporary use permit typically every year to do the same thing.
They did.
They did. And we've had other businesses that have, wanted to do the same type of thing, not the exact same type of thing, but something similar where they do events every single year and it becomes kind of part of their business model. So it's not really a temporary use anymore. So we
Right.
just wanted to have some language in here that says that Danielle has the discretion to say, okay, if you're going to do this every single year, we need to actually permit this.
Got it.
It's not going to affect like the Boy Scouts Christmas tree sales or things like that. I mean, that's not what this is intended for. It's
Right.
the more chronic event productions that go on.
Copy. Okay, moving on.
Okay. This is just referring back to the timeframes in the other section.
Okay.
This is just adding urban lot splits and 2-unit projects to our review authority table.
Okay.
Oh, and I did look at this over the break, and I believe Commissioner Kavanaugh brought this up. I think this was inadvertently deleted under the streamlined zoning verification. I think it should have just been this part under the regular zoning clearance. So I can take this out here because that doesn't make sense to take it out of the streamlined part.
Minimum required or maximum required time frame?
So I think it would still just be the 30 days because the idea of the zoning verification is you put up a sign for basically 2 weeks and then Danielle takes action. So it's probably shorter than 30 days actually. So if you're comfortable with me just removing this edit here.
So you're saying leave in the text within 30 days of finding.
For the streamlined zoning verification, yeah.
Yep. All right.
Okay.
Okay, next.
Okay, so then this is where this isn't consistent with how we actually process, permits for the zoning clearance and then the minor modification. So we basically say that the director is not going to take action until we've gone through the process and determined the application complete.
But it doesn't, you're not going to take action until after you've determined the application is complete. That was the same in all of these places where this edit was made. So after you've determined the application is complete, what's to keep you from saying you can do it within 30 days?
So once we deem the application complete, then we have to route it, get comments back, do notifications, postcards and things like that to adjacent property owners. So there are times when that might take more than 30 days. I would say for these types of applications that are staff level reviews, like a zoning clearance, we usually process those unless it's something really complicated or there's some issue that we are trying to resolve. Our turnaround used to probably be for like 4 to 6 weeks on those. Can be longer if it's something complicated.
So I would think that a timeline, let's make it 60 days instead of being open that way. The way it's written, only after the director is determined. That's broad and it leaves it open to anything. I would rather, as a business person, I'd rather say it's within 60 days so we're all on a level playing field. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense.
I feel like there ought to be if there used to be a number in there,
Just
what
change it.
number would be reasonable so that there is a number?
So I will say there was 30 days in there, but we often didn't meet that requirement. And there's things that are out of our control, like other agency comments that sometimes take longer to come in that would make it difficult for us to meet a timeline in here. So I feel like it could be a disservice if we put it in there and then for whatever reason the staff are not able to make that time frame, then you've created an expectation that they can't meet.
So what's been the fallout of not making the 30 days up to this point? Are we correcting a problem that doesn't exist? Can we just change it to 60?
We've had applicants identify this before, and it's created conflict. Yeah.
I'm more comfortable with a defined deadline.
Finite number.
I don't know if anybody else is.
Yeah,
I sort of feel like there ought to be a number in there.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be an unreasonable number. We know you are busy. But it feels like there ought to be a number. And in an expectation, that I think people applying for this should have some expectation of when it's going to be done, not an open-ended, well, after your application's complete.
Yeah, and I think it should be within not just 30 days, but let's define what the days. Is it 30 calendar days or 30 working days? And not that the number's 30, but just a little bit more clarification so that the applicant does have a roadmap.
That's a good point.
Is the completed application in the past, has there been an applicant that did not, that felt like their application was complete, they hit their 30 days, but in reality, their application was not complete? And that was a way to push back and tell them, hey, you're not done.
Yeah, I mean, within 30 days, we have to give them a letter saying, here's all the things you're missing or things you need to address before we can deem it complete for processing. So I would think if there's a specific time frame in here that you want us to commit to, then we may need to have a, sometimes we try to be flexible with the incomplete if there's things that are minor, but we think that we don't want to deem something complete and stop the process. We try to be flexible on that, but if there's a specific time frame we have to meet once we deem it complete, then we may not be able to have that flexibility.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. We would be way more rigid with what we deem incomplete. It would be letter of the application, not the flexible approach that we try and take.
Okay, so then your point that you're making is that there's some flexibility when you're saying the director has determined the application complete. So that ambiguity gives you latitude to say, well, it's close enough. I think we can move forward.
You could do that with a defined date anyway.
I think we would be uncomfortable committing to something if we don't have all the information we need. Like if they haven't checked all the boxes and we're saying, okay, we're going to commit to having this done in a certain time frame, we would want to make sure all the boxes are checked if that's how you want us to process these.
Director shall take appropriate action on the zoning clearance.
So you're saying that sorry, I used to push to talk. You're saying that would mean you might come down harder on the completeness of their application, but then it would still leave open this, how soon do you take action after it is complete? I mean, I get what you're saying. Neither one's ideal.
Generally, we don't have timeframes specified for our land use permits because there are a lot of timeframes that are out of our control. So, I mean, that's partly why we were looking at taking this out, because we don't have it for like a development permit or a use permit or any of our other major ones, which go to planning commission, which are more time intensive. I mean, these are still in the minor category at the director's level. But it is inconsistent with what we do with our other land use permits and having them in the code. I mean, it doesn't mean that we can't have goals that we want to do that are outside of the development code and have those posted similar to what we do with the building department. But a firm commitment in here could become a legal issue for us. And I think, as a commission, you can make a recommendation to council, but as the staff, we would recommend that council not support that.
All right, well, I don't want to get too caught up in the weeds on this item. So, I'm inclined to agree with staff at this point, and then if this is something that needs to be changed in the future, that we request that it comes back to us.
What if we did on the zoning clearance within approximately 30 calendar days of finding the application? Anybody?
No, it's just go.
No.
Yeah.
No, I'm good. Never mind.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a good compromise might be not having any firm commitments in the development code, but then having something similar to what you said the building department has with goals, but aren't legally binding in any way.
I hear what staff is saying here, and I see what you're saying about that might make the earlier part of this, the completion determination, awkward, strident, and uncomfortable, and draconian for the applicant. So, I guess I could go with this. I guess I could go with this.
It
the way
just
you
gives
have
a
it.
lot of power to them, to the staff, if...
But they're telling us they use that power for good.
And also,
That's
I will
true.
say,
That's what I
I've
heard.
processed a lot of zoning clearances in my 12 years here, and we try to turn those around because that's one of those things that we can get out the door in
Yeah.
a relatively quick. We try to get those off our plates as fast as we can.
Okay, can we move on from this one then?
Yeah.
What if it said like intends, like director intends, instead of shall take?
Or publicize your goal on that page where the applicants put their application in.
Within a goal of 30 days.
Well, you know, when it before I hit my, we, you know, after your application is complete, our goal is to process it something or other, and that could go on a web page. Or
I mean,
something.
but at this point, like we've watered it down so much that then what's the point of having the days in there anymore?
Let's move on.
Just trust our staff.
Same.
Ways available to
Ditto.
help any applicants that have questions. So I think, you know, we as the staff work really hard to try and work with all of our applicants with whatever types of projects they're doing when they come into planning, because not everyone's familiar with our process. But I mean, my time is not charged to any of these projects. Jenna's time generally is not charged to any of these projects. So we are the ones that are helping problem solve when something comes up if someone really has a critical time frame. So I think that's just good knowledge for the public to have, that we're here to help.
There are applicants out there that would say differently.
And I'm going to guess they're the ones that have incomplete applications.
Touche.
Okay, so this was just another cleanup to refer back to those time frames that we talked about earlier, and then the recurring events. It's just a different section that was referenced in. And then, okay, so here's the definitions. So we kind of took our detached definition and tried to come up with something that would make sense, because this does create confusion sometimes about what is an attached structure.
This came up from the ADU language, right?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what triggered this initially, the discussion about how we should have this in here, but I think partly it was because we define detached, but we don't define attached, so that just seemed weird. So the part that's kind of relates to the detached is that you know, the wall or ceiling or floor in common with another structure, but then the planner that worked on this came up with some additional language that she thought might help further clarify, because there are times when people want to use a breezeway to connect two structures, and so she came up with a standard that was based on something another jurisdiction does, which basically talks about the width of it and then the distance, having some kind of requirement for that to be in scale, so that you don't end up having two structures that are, you know, 200 feet apart with a giant breezeway attaching them, because I don't think that really meets the intent of what an attached structure would be.
Even if they're 40 feet away.
Could be 40 feet long with a 20-foot wide breezeway.
No, they wouldn't be.
I mean,
the breezeway one's been kind of an interesting evolution in time, because it started off with tiled honor homes where they would have the garage, you know, maybe at the top of where the driveway is, and then the house was down below. And over time, they're like, why do we not have a cover for this?
That was my very first job in Tahoe Donner, was one of those.
Right. And so then we said, well, you shouldn't get penalized for trying to make a safe access between the
Yeah.
two structures. So then we started allowing breezeways, and then people got very creative with what they considered a breezeway. And I even worked on one at Donner Lake where they had a utility easement in the middle of their property, and they built the house on one side, and they built a conditioned second floor breezeway and built their garage on the other side with living space above. So it was attached because it was conditioned, even though it was above ground level, and the utility company let them do that because they could still get equipment in that easement in theory if they needed it. So we've had every kind of different iteration of this, and I think this is just us trying to put that on paper to recognize what we've seen.
Good.
Okay.
Base station is one of the telecommunications requirements. Bed and breakfast was adding the host rental language. Bike share definition also does specify only electric bikes as of now. It's interesting changing that for future reference. Bike share storage yard.
Okay, moving on.
And then a campground. And so, in thinking about this, you know, what a campground is, our definition was definitely lacking. basic sanitation facilities, which basically western water.
Yeah, Laura, is your mic on?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
Rory was having a problem.
Sorry, Rory.
Lights always turn on now with their upgrades that they've done, so that's why, like, you heard us talking earlier, because we can't always tell if we're on.
So adding in the sanitation facilities and then including other things that you would typically find in a campground, picnic tables, bear boxes, showers, community areas, trails. And then if someone wanted to do something more intensive with other structures and things like that, then that's addressed in the recreational vehicle park definition.
Okay, moving on.
That's another telecom definition. Here's where we tried to clarify the interior access. It's just say continuous interior conditioned access.
Okay.
More telecom. And more. And then we have a lot of confusion about floor area and gross floor area, where we treat those, the same, essentially. So we just cross-referenced it so people would know to go look here to find the definition. And then this, we made some updates based on advice from the building division to try to be compliant with how they measure things, because there's oftentimes a discrepancy. So people will get their planning approval and then they come in for building permits and then the numbers don't match and then it creates confusion. So we addressed measuring by the outside perimeter, which is what they do. And then this was just I just changed that to make
You
that.
have an extra quotation mark in there. Five feet, quotation mark on the top of G there.
On the top. Where? Oh, I see. Yeah. I'll take that out. So we previously said 7 feet, but that's not actually what the building division does. And then we added in mezzanines, since those do count towards the usable floor area.
Was it it wasn't counted before?
We didn't have anything that addressed it. So typically if it was usable area that added to the space within like a tenant space, we would count it. We just didn't have it clarified anywhere.
Okay.
And I'll fix that typo. Hosted rental. That's just when you rent out a single bedroom. These were the kennel changes that were made based on advice from the animal services folks to be consistent with the municipal code. Were there any questions on those?
And that's animal service folks is the town of Truckee's.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
And then, so this was making a few changes. Sorry, I didn't make these edits. So it's under kitchen and cooking facilities. So basically, we have certain things that you can do outside a kitchen that we don't consider a kitchen. So this is just clarifying if you're outside of a kitchen, this is where that one well sink that we talked about earlier with the 2 square foot surface area.
So this is like the wet bar conversation again, right?
Yeah.
Dan, do you remember this conversation?
I do, yep.
And then we also talked about.
Do you remember the part of the conversation where we were saying why are we trying to get so down in the weeds on managing this?
Well, if you want to get in the weeds, I think it should be a 2-inch drain.
Yeah,
Because
why
then
are we,
you can connect that to a sewer ejector pump, and so if somebody needed to use an ejector to.
Yeah, why are we getting involved in drain sizes?
I'm not. I think that's just a typical thing from what I understand from the planner that worked on this that other jurisdictions require. But
I think we should take the maximum drain size out.
Okay.
Mitch?
Yeah, I really don't like this whole thing.
I don't. Yeah, and going back to the conversation, Dan, I just trying to remember that we went back and forth over this at another update when we were saying why are we even getting involved in mandating what size the sink is? Do you recall that?
Yeah, I do. It sounds like that's already in here. Doesn't mean we can't change it, right?
Yeah. I mean, so where else is the sink size referenced?
Why can't you change it? We're changing everything.
No, we
No,
can.
he just did say
Yeah,
that.
we could change it.
Yeah.
But it's already in here.
So I think the idea is that this isn't a sink that someone would use as a kitchen facility. So it's limited in size to something you would use, more like a bathroom sink, I
But
guess.
what if you want to
than-
have a shop and you want to have a laundry sink to clean in?
Or a man
Yeah.
cave and you're watching the game and you're having lasagna or something.
And a counter space not exceeding 6 lineal feet?
So
6
that's-
feet is nothing.
That's the current standard. So what we were proposing to change with that was to say that you can have cabinets or shelves, above or below. The way it just was confusing the way it was worded before. And there was a size limit on the cabinet space. So we took that out and basically just said as long as it's near where your, wet bar area is, we don't really care about them.
So Jamie,
size.
who worked on this, researched other jurisdictions also. So this is pretty standard language. The 1.5-inch drain is to preclude a garbage disposal. And then the limitations on cabinet, counter, I mean, the town's had those in effect since I started here 21 years ago. So that's not new. It also gives us some better controls for encouraging people to do the right thing when they're building ADUs and not do the wrong thing, which is illegal ADUs. And we're going to get more of them if we don't have some of these controls in place. And so we're still working on incentives for people to do ADUs, which we're trying to do, but these are helpful for the planners to get people to do the right thing.
So this again is the stick on detached living areas. Can't have a wet bar, you can't have a countertop.
You can
And
have a wet
that's
bar and you can have a counter. They just have to be a certain size.
Small.
And if you wanted to do something in excess of that, you could do it as part of an ADU.
Okay, but you can't do it in a detached unit. So again, it's just trying to discourage detached living units as a back way of encouraging ADUs.
Well, and I think delineating exactly what is supposed to be in a wet bar versus what is supposed to be in an ADU.
Okay, yeah, it does seem kind of nosy to be talking about. I get where you're trying to achieve there.
Permitted ADUs that Jamie's encountered will have substantially more than this because they went in after the fact, right, and added on to what we approved because they configured the space ahead of time knowing they were going to do an illegal conversion. So it is a helpful tool to define, like, this is how the space should be used. And I know it seems like minutia, but we really want to try and encourage people to do ADUs as permitted uses. And so if they want to have all this extra, then that's what we're trying to do is say, you want another, second kitchen, well, you can have an ADU if you want to do that.
Well, it
But
also
then I would
seems like
allow them
it's-
to have an ADU that they don't even use as an ADU. There's no requirement that they even rent their ADU. We don't have the carrots, right? Do we have the carrots in there somewhere?
For like full time,
Yeah.
yeah, we've got some programs for that we're fleshing out fully. But
We do, but we don't mandate that if you build
Yeah.
an ADU, it has to be rented full-time or
Okay,
anything
yeah,
like that.
thank
Yeah,
you.
we don't
Thank you
go
for
that far.
reading my mind on that question,
Yeah.
Jenna. And then, while my mic's on, number 5 looks like you're about to cross out the capital letter beginning that sentence, so you just fix that.
Okay, got it.
It just seems like people that are not trying to do the wrong thing are being punished. That's just, if they have a rec room or whatever, and they want a bigger sink, they can't have one.
Yeah, and I don't see why you couldn't have a garbage disposal in there too if you had a.
Yeah, what,
I mean, could you, and I know staff hates this, but could you put somewhere at the discretion of the director or something to allow for that conversation if someone is trying to have a wet bar or a rec room?
That's
don't
just
have a standard to use, then it's very difficult for me as a director to say no. So we try and limit those to things that are like, oh, I want a height exception. The code says I can allow for, up to a 5-foot increase based on these circumstances. And if I can check those boxes, I can approve that. So it would have to be something very specific for me to say, if you meet these criteria, then I could approve that.
Do we need number 5? I mean, if somebody wants to do an ADU and have a whole bank of cabinets for their extra towels.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that too. We could strike that number 5 entirely.
Can you scroll up on the page? Thank you. How'd that place in Tahoe Donner with 3 kitchens and 3 bars get built? That's what I want to know.
No, but let's not punish everybody because one person did the wrong thing.
Okay, so let's get clear on what we're directing staff to do here. So, Commissioner Freeman, you're in favor of removing sentence 5 entirely?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the point here, and I think I'm fine with it, but yeah, if somebody wants to put extra cabinets in,
Yeah.
we've already limited their amount of countertop space and cooking facilities,
Okay.
quantity of sinks.
Mitch, I'm assuming you're okay with getting rid of that sentence as well?
The more the better. What about, are we still 1.5 inch drain? Are we getting rid of that?
I'd prefer to get rid of the 1.5 inch drain. Dan?
Yes.
Mitch?
Yes.
Okay. So let's remove the 1.5 inch drain and remove sentence number 5 entirely.
Okay, I've got those and fixing the capitalization.
Well, the capitalization doesn't matter because you're striking the whole
Oh,
sentence.
yeah, good point. I'll take that out.
Okay, we'll move on to the next one.
Okay. This is just clarifying that you can have living area within a residential accessory structure. And we took out garages because if a garage is unconditioned, then it wouldn't be living area anyway, so that seemed a little redundant.
Yep. Okay. Wireless. Okay.
I think you had a question about this
Yeah,
one.
this is the one that I wanted to. So, an advertising display that's attached to a mobile, non-motorized vehicle. What about those trucks that drive around that have no other function than they have a cab that holds one driver, and then you can't haul anything with it. It's just signage.
That's what this is intended to address.
It doesn't talk about motorized
Yeah, it
vehicles.
says
These are
non-motorized.
motorized billboards, but how can
Yeah.
we
It says
prevent them from
mobile.
entering town? You can't
I think
prevent a
that
vehicle
I think the
from entering
mobile
town.
part. I guess it could say mobile, motorized or non-motorized.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? Stop trucks stop these vehicles at the
then
town border?
That's my next question: is what's the enforcement?
So we can't stop them driving around on the streets, but we can stop them from parking it somewhere on private property and using
Okay.
it as a billboard.
Okay, so now, just to get clear on what that definition is, so what about the cute little Volkswagen bus that Zuri has out in front of theirs? Is that a mobile billboard or is that a vehicle that
That is just a vehicle that's got
signage on it?
signage on it.
Yeah,
It's not attached.
it's a branded vehicle.
Right, but if they were to put an A-frame sign on top of it and that was advertising their business, then that would essentially function that way. Or they created a piece of plywood that they somehow screwed to the outside of it, then that would be the equivalent.
So we need to come up with some sort of language in here that says something about, motorized vehicle with the sole intent of advertising, or, I'm not sure what maybe Coral, you could come up with some language for us here.
Could we go back to the place in the code where the mobile billboards are prohibited? Because this is just the definition.
Yeah, I think it just lists.
What did we say?
I
What
think
did
it
we
just-
say there?
Under prohibited, it just says mobile billboard.
It just says, oh, you're just prohibited. We don't say you can't park it. Maybe.
So yeah, this
already says and is for the primary purpose of advertising. So it already says that. I think the only thing that would make everybody here happy is if it said motorized or non-motorized
Yeah,
vehicle.
no, I agree with you, Mitch. Okay.
As long as we're not opening, I mean, how do we prevent them? We can't prevent that car from driving around town. So we're saying
Well,
they're
yeah, I mean,
prohibited.
that
Where did we
enforcement-
say they were prohibited?
Well, if someone was to be parking one on private property and using it as an advertising
Okay.
billboard,
So
essentially.
we've covered that in the prohibition then.
Right, because
They
the
can drive it
code
through town.
regulates uses on private property versus stuff that's happening in the right of way.
So we can't. Yeah, that covers my concern.
Okay, so we're adding motorized or non-motorized to this sentence.
So the loophole here is just have it be a trailer, a box
No,
trailer.
because it says right here.
Yeah, but then that's not the primary purpose. It's a box trailer. Right?
Fair enough. Yeah. So
Well, if it's
I mean,
attached to a non-motorized vehicle, is that a bus?
So if the primary purpose is advertising,
It's
that's
storage. I'm thinking about contractors and guys who have,
I think we're
Whatever, guys
really
who-
just talking about. We're not talking about a box truck that says Daniel Frame and Construction on it that is used for ferrying materials back and forth. You know, with your
But you,
signage on
you
the
do
side.
see those, not mine, but those kind of box trucks parked indefinitely at places that look old and beat up. Like, how do we?
Yeah, I mean, if someone has a sign that's painted on or, part of the vehicle, we can't regulate that. It's challenging because we have some businesses in town that like to prominently park their vehicles with signage for advertising purposes throughout town. But because it's not attached to the vehicle, it's part of the paint job, we can't regulate that. We can encourage them to do the right thing.
Okay, so we're adding motorized
Or
to this and moving on.
Okay.
That's the way you sneak anything into the code. You just put the word wireless in front of it.
It's wireless advertising.
Okay, so this were similar to what we did with the campground. This is just identifying some sanitation facilities, other things that you might have, and that it can be a, more high density, intensity use than a campground.
Okay, we good? Moving on. Wireless.
I told you there was a lot. More. That's it.
The end. All right. Good job, everybody.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Where are we at? So we've already did public comment. We've got to now we're ready for a motion, if I'm not mistaken.
So just because we have some new commissioners, sometimes we will write your changes on the screen. Sometimes if we're dual tasking, we won't have the opportunity to do that, but we can read the changes out. And then when someone makes a motion, they can say, as read by staff.
Yeah.
So that way you've got that as part of your motion.
Okay, so Laura, you're going to recap our changes.
Okay. The first was the text change about the parking exemptions. Next was the exterior lighting, updating the name of the society on the second reference, fixing the telecom reference in the setback table, and taking out footnote 5, which doesn't exist. Checking if ADA is defined or if we need to add that language to that parking section. Mirroring the language for the parking exemption in the other parking section. Leaving the construction sign size at 20 feet. Taking out the language in the sign code about the materials between including and etc. Fixing the typo and the spelling of principal. Changing the staging area sign to 20 feet. Leaving the streamline 30 days, or the 30 days in the streamline zoning verification. Taking out, there was an extra punctuation in the gross floor area definition. Taking out the drain size and number 5 in the kitchen definition, and adding motorized to the mobile billboard section.
Who's ready to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt Resolution 2023-09, recommending approval to the Town Council of 2023 Development Code amendments and recommending the amendments to be exempt from CEQA pursuant to Section 15061B3 of the CEQA guidelines and Sections 15060C2 and 15060C3 of Title 14 of the California Code of Regulations, with the amendments proposed in this presentation.
I'll second.
Chair Grove,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner Claren,
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor,
Yes.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. And with that, we'll move on to staff reports. Do we have any staff reports?
Sure, I will briefly touch on what will be before you next month. We've got 2 items for sure. We've got an introduction of and discussion on something called objective design standards. For those that have followed the general plan closely, you've heard that term before. If you haven't, I'll just briefly explain. State law has changed pretty radically in the past couple years, and we are now required to develop something called objective design standards. Those are development standards that really require no discretion in applying a standard. They would be universally understood by someone who's a layperson and or a professional, and they're really in response to the state's housing crisis and frustrations and difficulties in getting housing approved throughout the state of California. So the state has now told us that when we're reviewing housing projects, we need to have these in place. As you are probably well aware, as a body that reviews discretionary projects inherently in your mission, we have a lot of discretion in a lot of our standards, and we are working to change that through imposition of the objective design standard. So it's going to be something very new for us. It's going to be a robust discussion. It'll be kind of a two-parter. We're introducing them in June, and then in July, assuming your commission can get to a recommendation, then we would be asking you to do that at that point. And then your recommendation, similar to a recommendation you made for the general plan, that'll be forwarded to the council for their eventual decision. So there's a lot to get through in those. As I mentioned, they cover a lot of sections of our development code and are really intended to remove the discretion that we currently have in our plan. And then we will have review of a car wash facility in the Grays Crossing specific plan. And I think that's it for now.
Okay, an actual project coming up. Exciting. All right, do I have any commission member reports? Nothing to report.
I got a question.
Okay.
When did the new commissioners get sworn in?
A few hours ago.
10 minutes before this meeting.
Okay. All right. And with that, we will adjourn to the next meeting of the Planning Commission on June 20th. Sounds like it's going to be exciting. 2023, 5 p.m. here at 10183 Truckee Airport Road, Truckee, California, 96161, and we are adjourned.